That's now live, Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everyone to this afternoon's meeting of the Greater Cambridge Partnership Joint Assembly. I'd like to also welcome not only members of the press and the public, but also members joining online on the live stream version of the meeting. Members, you are now aware of the need to keep your video camera switched on if you can for the duration of the meeting, and to keep your microphone muted except when I invite you to speak. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or make a contribution. There is always a risk we might run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do. Should it occur, I'll declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it's not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. Can I remind members and officers and public speakers that all virtual meetings will be recorded and that these recordings will be published on the GCP YouTube channel. Okay, so starting the proceedings of the business, item 1 is apologies for absence. Have we had any?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Dr. Andy Williams.
Thank you. Item 2 is declarations of interest. Are there any declarations for this meeting? Councillor Bajan.
Yes, sorry, Chair. I'm a member of Cambridge Cycling Campaign.
Thank you. And Christopher Walkinshaw.
Thank you, Chair. My routine reference to anything that covers the east side of Cambridge, my role with Marshall of Cambridge in connection with Marley, but also in relation to the quarterly progress report to declare an involvement with Cambridge and.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And just to remind people to use the hand function, because that's where I'm looking for contributions when we get to them in a while. Also members should note that if there are interests to declare that occur to you during the meeting, please shout. Okay, so item 3, minutes of the previous meeting, and these are in your agenda pack from page 3. I'm aiming to go through these by calling page numbers out reasonably quickly. So if you have any points on this, then make sure you put your hand up. So page 1, sorry, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So no one had any issues. I assume, therefore, there is agreement I should sign the minutes as an accurate record when I can. And indeed, that was a long meeting last time. We have what could be quite a bit shorter meeting this afternoon, but we will see. And I urge people not to luxuriate in the time for the sake of it, just because it's a lighter agenda. Let's go to item 4 then, which is questions from members of the public. And this is just to highlight that we have a number of these which have been accepted for the meeting. There are 3 public questions, 2 of them relating to agenda item 6 on public transport improvements and city access, and 1 for the quarterly progress report, which is agenda item 7. Those questions have been published and they're available for members of the Joint Assembly and the public to see, and the questions will be read out by the Governance and Relationship Manager or asked by the questioner according to what they've agreed. I think there are also 2 members of partner authorities who have requested to contribute at different points on the agenda, and I will bring them in accordingly. Item 5 then is petitions, and there have been no petitions, I'm informed. Okay, so the first major item on the agenda to discuss is item 6, public transport improvements and city access strategy. There is a report here which is going to be introduced by Peter and Isabel, but just to say, talk about the sequence that we're going to do this in so that everyone is clear. We're going to take public questions first. We have a representative of one of our partner bodies who will make a statement or ask a question after that. I'll then invite the officers to respond to that representation and public question. I will then ask the officers to make their presentation of their report, and then we will have our debate. And I've already notified Assembly members about how I want to organise that debate so that we make sure that we keep it focused, but we can come back to that later. And so let us start by inviting the first public questioner, please, Wilma.
Yes, Chair, we have Matthew Danish with us who will ask the first question. Okay,
hello, Matt. Good afternoon. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
We can.
Great. Thanks. I'm asking a question on behalf of CampCycle. CampCycle is a volunteer-led charity with over 1,550 members that works for more, better, and safer cycling for all ages and abilities in the Greater Cambridge region. We welcome the introduction of new proposals to deal with cycling missing links in the Greater Cambridge region. In general, we believe that the GCP will gain excellent value for money by building a network of high-quality cycle routes suitable for all ages and abilities. There is much need for improvement throughout the region, and while the routes identified are relevant, we have questions about how they were prioritized in the active travel study document that accompanies the agenda. We ask, 1, why at this stage were certain cycle key connections left out of the evaluation, and will they be added as the project moves forward? For example, Arbury Road East, one of the most important cycle links in the area without any infrastructure. It has been identified by the LCWIP and is marked as a key cycle connection, but otherwise it has been left out of the active travel study. Likewise for Barnwell Road and Brooklands Avenue. 2, will the GCP commit to using local transport note 1/20 as the basis for designing high quality cycling infrastructure? We are concerned that some of the specific gap analysis sections in the active travel study make low quality suggestions that would be worse than nothing, such as paired use pavements or narrow advisory cycle lanes. And finally, 3, what were the criteria for the ranking of the cycling missing links in Table 1 of Agenda Item 6? And what were the specific numbers for each item? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Matt. And I think a helpful question on the criteria of the cycle schemes. We'll go to the officers to respond to that, but I'd like to take next a question from Rosalind Lunt, who is the chair of the Arbury Road East Residents Association. And I think, Wilma, you're going to read that one out.
Yes, I am. The question reads as follows. Why is Arbury Road South absent from the prioritised list of missing links for the GCP's future investment strategy? Agenda Item 6, paragraph 5.8 on the draft local cycling and walking infrastructure plan provides an initial prioritised list of missing links on Table 1, page 31. But Table 1 on page 35 shows the Arbury Road corridor as complete. It is not. Arbury Road from North Cambridge Academy to Milton Road has no cycle provision. It is a narrow road with parking on pavements. It and Union Lane are a missing link in the corridor to the cycle bridge across to Newmarket Road or to Cambridge North Station. When SQW evaluated this corridor in 2019, it only considered phases 1 and 2 of the GCP's improvements and judged that was complete. Mike Davies, then Director of Cycling for GCP and the County Council, disagreed. He offered to hold a workshop on how to improve cycling and pedestrian provision on the remainder of the Arbury Road in October 2019. After his departure, the cycling team in January 2020 refused to hold this workshop because of imminent improvement works on Histon Road. The County Council's LCWIP indicates that Arbury Road South, the same section as above, and Union Lane should be treated as a prioritised cycling route implemented in the short term, and recommends making this section of Arbury Road one way in order to provide on-road cycle lanes or put in a modal filter. The County Council's Highways Committee has already agreed that such a modal filter should be in the second tranche of government-supported measures to combat COVID and reduce pollution. This should be shown high on the GCP's list of priorities.
Okay, thank you very much for reading that, Wilma, and Rosalind Lunt for asking it. And I'm now going to ask City Councillor Colin McGurty, who is, I can see, already in the meeting, who has asked to speak as a member for the Queen Edith's part of Cambridge. Colin.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
You can, yeah, great.
Excellent, thanks. And thanks to Peter and the team for this report and for updating us on plans on the city access strategy in general. I think this makes a huge amount of sense as an integrated approach to providing better public and personal transport options on the one hand, while managing demand for road space to address congestion and pollution on the other. I wanted to highlight in particular the missing link cycling proposals contained in section 5.8. It's something that I've had a great many doorstep conversations about back when we had doorstep conversations, and overwhelmingly, I think people want a cycling network that they can put their trust in. Clearly, there's no good getting on a nice cycle lane outside your house if it drops you in the middle of a busy road after the first major junction. So while not everyone I speak to is in favour of one scheme or another, most see the benefit of a joined up network. And I'm really encouraged to see this suite of proposals coming forward. It's something we've both campaigned on and worked actively for in Queen Edith's, especially around the biomedical campus, for instance. So given that the two top priority schemes listed on page 31 are in part in Queen Edith's, I thought it was important I come and let you know the extent to which that accords with our thinking locally. Of course, it's not for me to say how you should prioritise the list, and you've had some input on that. Clearly, I want the best for my residents, and others may have a more holistic view to offer. And nor is it for any of us to preempt the outcome of any public consultations. But I do encourage you to move forward with those consultations and try to get as much public engagement as possible. Hopefully at a time when meeting in person in church halls and area committees is once again possible. On to a couple of questions, if I may. Mowbray Road and Pern Road is listed as the highest priority scheme, and I do see the sense in taking two of the already improved junctions that I mentioned and better connecting them. But I do also share the view that this seems comparatively expensive. To a simple soul like myself, it looks like pretty straightforward wide roads with perhaps some lampposts and bus stops to move. Can we have a bit more information about how these estimates have come about? And presumably there's further work on that to follow. Secondly, to what extent are we able to demonstrate learnings from previous projects here? Would it be fair to describe these as cautiously high estimates, for instance? Or how will the best value for money and the greatest potential impact be considered? And finally, what engagement have we had with stakeholders on these routes? Long Road, for instance, is home to the hospital campus and two further education colleges who we've worked with in the past on some LHI funded improvements, none of which had the potential to do as much as we would like, and I'm sure they will have plenty of useful input for you. I'd like to thank the committee for this opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Colin. I think Isabel is going to respond. She is Head of Transport Strategy. And so, Isabel, can I leave it to you then to go through all of the points of all of those 3 contributions?
Yes, thank you. So thank you for the questions and the points raised. So just taking the question from CamCycle first of all. So the GCP is making a significant investment in the local cycling network already, with more than £115 million going into 12 greenways, the Chisholm Trail, the A10 cycle route, and a series of cross-city cycling projects. And that's all as outlined in the budget that's presented alongside the quarterly progress report today. So in addition, active travel routes will also be provided as part of the GCP's 4 corridor schemes, and both the Histon and Milton Road projects significantly improve these routes for cycling. So beyond this investment, and that made by local partners, including the County Council through the government's active travel programme, the study aims to identify potential gaps in the network and consider how these could be addressed. The methodology for selecting the routes is set out in the published study, and you asked specifically about 3 of the routes, one of which was also asked about by Rosalind Lund as well. So in terms of Arbury Road, both Arbury Road and Union Lane are in the County Council's active travel fund list, and therefore they haven't been included in this study because they have that funded list has got government funding, and so we didn't want to duplicate here. In terms of Brooklands Avenue, the Brooklands Avenue Hills Road junction is included in the Hills Road link as part of the study. However, Brooklands Avenue itself doesn't score highly for cycling potential, and so hasn't been included in the local cycling and walking infrastructure plan at this point. Barnwell Road also did not score highly using the rapid cycleway prioritisation tool. But as the paper sets out, officers are proposing that the GCP seeks comments on where any additional City Deal funding for active travel should be targeted through a public consultation. So second question was around the LTN 120 guidance. So we can confirm that the LTN 120 guidance will significantly inform and influence the design of future measures. And then the final point in terms of the criteria for ranking. So the criteria for the initial appraisal of the cycling missing links is set out on pages 25 and 26 of the published study, including the scores and ranking for each link. And so hopefully that picks up the question about Arbury Road as well. And then in terms of the comments from Councillor McGurty, so you asked about kind of the estimating and the expense of these routes. So the estimates have been put together independently by our consultants using standard methodology about the cost of different pieces of infrastructure. They are initial assessments. Obviously, any detailed design work would need to kind of go into that in detail. Linked to that, in terms of learning from other projects, they have all had a kind of a buffer applied to them to take into account that, you know, cost estimate is an early estimate at this point as well. In terms of engagement with stakeholders on routes, so as part of the study, we did talk to some of the major employers, including kind of the university and the biomedical campus as part of putting the study together. But as part of doing the public consultation, the plan would be to speak much more widely to people to get input on that.
Okay, thank you very much, Isabel. I mean, I think that, you know, your answer may have generated points that members might want to pick up when we get to the debate on that part of the report. But thank you for that, and thank you again to the questioners. So I think we now go forward with the presentation of your report. I think that is going to be done initially by Peter.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And then Isabel's going to do all the hard work. I mean, I just wanted to put a little bit of context around the report, and hopefully will sort of help frame your discussions. So the reports on city access and public transport improvements that we've brought to you previously have generated much discussion. And I'm pretty sure that today is going to be, you know, exactly the same, particularly because many of you have got firmly held views on what the answer are, you know, what the answer is, and you've rightly challenged officers on the emerging proposals. I'll also say because there's not a straightforward answer. So in a sense, the very nature of it generates debate. I mean, I just wanted to be clear about the context that it has changed beyond all recognition since we started this process. So the proposals today, for some of you, might not go far enough. They might not quite point in the right direction. But I think we need to be mindful that when we started this, we didn't have a global pandemic. We didn't have the biggest economic shock in 300 years. We didn't have a public transport network that is now underwritten by the Exchequer for the first time in more than a generation. And so what's happened in recent times is the context and the focus has been on economic recovery, and particularly on recovery of the public transport network, which I have to say, sat here today, looks extremely challenging. So the report is framed in that context. We will need to revisit this. We will be bringing this back to you in future as the situation changes. And I think it's important that that's just foremost in your minds, Chair, as you think and talk through this report. So as I say, Isabel's now going to do all the heavy lifting on it.
Thank you. Isabel.
Great, thank you. As Peter said, the paper brings together a package of measures which aim to support a sustainable recovery from COVID-19 by making additional progress towards achieving the GCP's aims of increasing use of sustainable modes of transport, reducing congestion, improving air quality and reducing carbon emissions. The project does sit at the heart of the City's Sustainable Transport Programme, and by addressing these areas, the proposed package will add value to our infrastructure programme and support the creation of a competitive public transport network. So working within the current context, as Peter has outlined, the paper brings together a more comprehensive package of measures, combining support for sustainable transport with measures to discourage car use and improve air quality. It builds on technical work to date, so as well as which shows that as well as the GCP's infrastructure programme, we need a transformed network of services and more space for buses, cycling and walking to secure future economic and environmental prosperity. Delivering this is a key part of supporting a sustainable recovery from the pandemic. So to support the local economy as we emerge from restrictions, alongside working with partners to secure some of the benefits of lower traffic levels for our health and for the environment. The reality of the restrictions mean that we have to take a balanced approach and to factor in what we can and can't do at particular moments in time. And in particular, this comes back to the key principle that has been adopted previously around providing people with an alternative to their car ahead of or simultaneously with any restrictions around driving. And there are challenges in doing that, given the public transport context at the moment. But that doesn't mean that we can't start to plan and start to set some trigger points for when we will take action. So today is about the overarching approach and package for city access. It's about setting momentum and direction for interventions, but it's not about taking decisions on the exact nature of each element or making specific spending commitments that will come back later. So taking the different parts of the paper then, the first section looks at support for sustainable transport. And the paper proposes a package to incentivise use of public transport as it incentivises from central government support and we come out of the pandemic based on the proposals outlined in the Sistra report, which you've reviewed previously. So this would involve lengthening operating hours, increasing frequencies, providing additional routes and including rural routes, and also looking at a fare pilot. The final package would need to be designed with the combined authority and operators, and the exact nature and timing of it will coincide with the pandemic situation, public health advice and government policy and funding around bus services. As I've said, investing in the recovery of public transport is a key part of supporting the local economy and meeting aspirations for an inclusive and sustainable recovery. It's likely that increases in services would need to build up incrementally over time. So this is about laying foundations for a future bus network, not a big bang to kind of bring a whole load of services all at once. And the aim would be that you would be building these services up to be commercially viable. If that didn't happen, then a funding source would need to be found for those that weren't commercially viable, or they would need to be discontinued. So we would need to factor that in terms of kind of when we come back to you. Alongside this, the paper also proposes enhancements to Park and Ride, in particular expanding the Babraham site, adding additional cycling facilities, and we've also set out some design principles for future travel hubs as well as part of the GCP programme. Turning then to support for active travel. So the paper recognises the opportunity to increase active travel, and as we've discussed as part of the public questions, is proposing consolidating the GCP's investment in the active travel network with additional funding to address gaps. So analysis has been undertaken to identify missing links, building on the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans, and we're proposing to seek stakeholder and public input on prioritisation for around £20 million of additional city deal funding. Other sources would obviously be needed to complete all of the networks. It's quite a substantial amount of money. The proposals would return early next year, and that's at the point at which we would ask for approval for a specific funding amount. So the second part of the package is then prioritising road space for sustainable transport. So there's been a clear need identified throughout the technical work that we've done over time that we need to create space for sustainable transport. And the paper proposes a blended approach, so prioritising road space alongside changes to parking. And there's kind of two main elements to this. So the first is working with the County Council to develop a road network hierarchy to prioritise sustainable transport. And then from that, taking forward a more wide-ranging programme of road space reallocation to implement it. The second part is working with the County Council and City Council on an integrated parking strategy, which would aim to promote sustainable transport and discourage car use, alongside improving access and more effectively managing the use of on and off street parking to reduce congestion on the network. And that would include consideration of how residents' parking zones play into a future strategy. Alongside that, the paper proposes funding delivery of civil parking enforcement in South Cambridgeshire, which is important for the management of the network as a whole. As part of this, it's also important to say that changes to the road network and parking are most likely to impact on those who find it more difficult to switch modes, in particular people with disabilities. So alongside this work, we have some work underway to identify accessibility barriers and develop plans to address these. And the idea is to take that forward in parallel with the work on road space and parking, so as not to disadvantage people. The third part is tackling air pollution. So meeting GCP and partners' net zero commitments will require both modal shift to public transport and for buses to be zero emission. We've kind of discussed that previously. And that's because in terms of the aspiration to expand the bus network, if that bus fleet looked similar to how it looked today, we're likely to see air quality issues. We're proposing to work with bus operators, the County Council, the City Council and the Combined Authority to reduce emissions by moving to zero emission services within the central area by 2025 and to Euro 6 standards in the short term. And as part of that, we'd be undertaking an appraisal of options for, not only how can we support operators and others in doing this, but also how we might limit access in future to public transport vehicles, coaches, taxis and HGVs not meeting emissions criteria as the four different types of vehicles that have been identified in the local transport plan where action on emissions is particularly important. So the aim of these proposals is to bring to you a balanced package. It's informed by the technical work that has been done over the last few years, including the packages work and the integrated impact assessment that you considered back in November last year. The aim is to support a sustainable recovery from the pandemic alongside working towards long-term objectives on congestion, public transport, air quality and carbon emissions. There are two elements that are not picked up specifically in this package. The first is wider measures to support the decarbonisation of cars, and the second is identification of a long-term funding mechanism for wider public transport enhancements. Both of those will be informed by the Combined Authority and government policy, as well as transport and workplace trends as we emerge from the pandemic. And as Peter says, these are issues we're likely to need to return to at a future point in time. So just wanted to finish with the next steps that's set out in the paper. The paper sets out a series of milestones for taking forward the different elements of the package, including when they will return to Joint Assembly and Executive Board. And as I said at the beginning, today is about the overarching approach and package to city access rather than taking decisions on the exact nature of each element or making specific spending commitments, and that will come later. It's about setting momentum and a forward plan for how the package will progress and when these decisions will come in the future. In terms of public transport, improvements will be driven by national guidance on any use of public transport and any continuation of the current DfT restrictions on funding. But we will work in advance with operators and with the combined authority, so we have a package to deploy when trigger points are met. In terms of the cycling network, as mentioned previously, aiming to consult in the summer and discuss a package of additional measures in early 2022. We plan to bring forward a paper on options for encouraging the use of cleaner buses, coaches, taxis and HGVs in the autumn. And the development of the network hierarchy and parking strategy alongside the accessibility work would report back later this year with implementation from 2022. And that's all from me for now, so thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Members will be aware that I am suggesting that we use the way that Isabel sort of segmented this paper for our own discussions, so that we talk about first one bit, then another bit, then another bit, because otherwise we don't end up by having an idea about what members think across the whole of the report. So the first of those was the public transport aspects of the report, and these are the ones referred to in paragraphs 5.4 to 5.7. I wanted to kick that off, if I could, by asking a question that certainly on my mind, but there is a statement in 5.6, quite a clear one, how an ongoing revenue source will need to be found for any supported public transport services that do not become commercially viable following the initial recovery period, if a decision is taken for those to continue. And I'm just kind of a little bit taken aback by that statement, because we have always said about GCP funding that we are not in receipt of a flow of ongoing revenue with which to pay for things. So things that we start need someone to take them off us if that's going to continue. And my surprise is that there is not even any scenarios identified here about what will happen to services we improve through funding them with subsidy after we've no more money to do that with. And the point's made particularly stark by the fact that in all of the previous discussions we've had on this, the reason we would be subsidizing these routes is that even without COVID, even before that, they weren't economic. These are the classic services which in any area to exist need to have a public subsidy. The services that extend the day over which they're provided and extend the area to where the demand may be thinnest as well. So I'm just very concerned that we do some great things by expanding the network and services, but we end up by having to dump that because we haven't got the money to keep it going, and we don't seem to have any other solutions on means of keeping it going after that. Anyway, that was point I wanted to make. I suggest that perhaps Isabel and officers comment on that when we've had other contributions as well. But I can see we've got some of those already. Firstly, Mike Sargent.
Thank you, Chair. I very much welcome this report, and I think it's very timely following the government's announcements on Monday, because I think we have got a clear path. I guess we're all hopeful that by June things will be very different to what they are now and very different to what we had last year. But I'm very taken by the point on page 25 of the report, which says there's a risk of a car-led recovery. And I'm therefore disappointed that pretty much all of the action points we're talking about today are post-June, even for consideration, a lot of them. And I think it's therefore important that we do crack on. I think the only sort of chink of light I saw in the report in terms of short-term measures, and I would ask the officers to advise what's actually happening, is on page 34, where it says the GCP will work with operators and the CPCA on the package of support in the coming weeks. So this can be deployed when the trigger points are met. And this is in terms of public transport and changes to the pandemic situation. So I would ask officers to explain what stage that's at and what trigger points they are referring to in that. And while I've got the microphone, as it were, Chair, I just want to give notice that I have a proposal when we get on to the more general discussion about how things fit together, if that's okay.
Yep, that's great. Thank you very much, Mike. And now I've got Lucy Netzinger, followed by Eileen Wilson. Lucy.
Thank you. I also welcome the concept and I think it is really important that we invest in the bus network. I think that I am not alone in the frustration that there's been over the past 3 or 4 years in the lack of support that there's been in the past for our bus network, particularly from the Combined Authority. So my question's really, I mean, I think we need to do this. I think it's really important. And I think Mike's initial comments on the urgency of it and the need to be moving quite quickly are very well made. Looking at the figure at on 5.3, the future bus network concept, I'm very pleased to see how much that extends out beyond the Greater Cambridge Partnership area. It's really good and very important that the bus network does go out beyond our area. But if you're planning on having operating hours from 5 a.m. to midnight on the whole of that area, and it may be that you're not because you're just talking about the core, but it would be important to get clarity on that. That will be expensive. I'm just very interested to know what sort of partnership you're getting from the Combined Authority, and in terms of the amount of financial support that there's going to be from this, how much is expecting to come from the Greater Cambridge Partnership and how much is likely to come from the Combined Authority?
Thank you, Lucy. Eileen Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Oh, yeah. Yes. Well, I've got 2 points. One is I welcome this report as well. I understand about looking at a post-COVID situation, but I think given the original concept of why we're looking at these things is that we need to look beyond that, because the post-COVID situation won't be with us all the time, and we need to look at a future where we've got beyond that. So it's a bit worrying that we're looking at the more short term at the moment without looking at what we're giving to the future. On the figures on pages 28 and 29, I was a bit disappointed that the figure on page 28 still looks at transport in almost existing corridors, and there's no cross connection between in the gaps in between those corridors. And then looking on to figure 2 on page 29, we have sort of pale orange lines which are labelled as rural connections. I would like some explanation about what they are intended to be, and also the blue lines are labelled as key bus corridors. Does this mean these will be quick routes, or will they still be routes that sometimes go around a number of villages?
Thank you, Eileen. I've now got Ian Solon.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, just picking the last 2 speakers have picked up on figure 2, and aware that it's a concept of the future bus network as a diagram. But I mean, just sort of the area to the south looks a little bit sort of confused in the diagram, and we might just want to sharpen that up. For example, the new Granta Park and Ride connecting up to the Trumpington Park and Ride rather than the Cambridge South station, which I thought it was when we went on the tour. For example, the Foxton Travel Hub is missing from this, and the role that might have in a future bus network. We're progressing that ahead of the new Barton Park and Ride or Travel Hub there, which isn't a project currently, but that's obviously a key bit of the network to the west. I mean, those are the things that I've noticed, because those are the kind of areas that I cover. But so I don't know whether there are other parts of this conceptual network that are also slightly questionable. But I'd just invite officers to sharpen that up a little bit if they could.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Dave Bagent, you were there a moment ago, you disappeared, and now you're back again.
Yeah, I'm still here, Chair.
Good.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, of course.
Absolutely, that's good. Right, I just want to make a note that we are, at this present moment in time, almost achieved our pollution and traffic reductions. We're on about a 33% reduction in traffic coming into the city centre. So it would be an ideal position to try and maintain. And I'm just a bit disappointed that officers haven't looked at this and made some suggestions that would support the idea that whilst we have a reduction in transport coming into the city, that before June, and I know this is a big task, that we actually put some things in place that will actually keep the cars out of the city. There's a lot more people working from home. We could think about how we might encourage that. If every worker in the city worked from home 1 day a week, the traffic would reduce and disappear. If we could move on getting the buses out there to be used, and perhaps making them a little bit more user-friendly with good office type facilities, and maybe do a deal with employers that if an employee got on the bus and logged on, that their working day started at that point. Because if you're in a car, you can't work in the car, but you can work on a bus. There's a number of things that could be thought of. We have noticed how our regular local authority staff, who've been so solid, safe pairs of hands, during this COVID, have become more entrepreneurial, more able to move quickly and fleet of foot. So I'm looking for some quick measures, and I was hoping that we would have something in front of us today. And I'm wondering how much that's possible to actually achieve at this stage. I'd also like to talk for a second about Mill Road Bridge. We have a living example, 6 months old almost, or yes, 6 months old, of what happens when you interfere with a major throughway into the city. And I would like, I'm sure officers are drawing data from that, but I would like to see the GCP register its support for maintaining that throughway intervention, for maintaining a situation where a road has been closed, a major road in the city, and trying to build on that. I appreciate that other councils have spoken about a longer term, but this is a once in a lifetime position. We have 27% of the vehicles off the road at the moment, and we should be doing something quickly before June to try and affect that. And I'm wondering, will the emergency measures that what's currently called stage 2 still be available after June, or will they disappear on that day when all the legislation to protect the public disappears? Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. I'm now going to ask Isabel to come back, or Isabel or Peter, I don't know who that will be. Looks like Peter just indicated on those questions and points in relation to the public transport segment, and then we'll go on to the cycling one. Dave was taking us dangerously close to the third section in his last comment, but I'm sure that'll help us when we get there. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I'll start, and all the tricky questions, Isabel, will pick up. Look, at the heart of the public transport conundrum is we cannot sit here with any certainty and say the previous bus network is coming back. So for us to then sit up and discuss how we build on the previous bus network is not a solid, sound basis for us to take decisions as of today. The current bus network today is completely unviable. It's entirely funded, well, in large part, bar 20, 30% in terms of fares income, by the Exchequer. And at some point, the Exchequer is going to want to stop paying for it. We know that government is producing a national bus strategy, in part in reflection of the challenges of bringing back and what that looks like. So the wolf near our sledge, if you want an analogy, is how do we work with various partners to, as a first step, get the bus network back? Because, you know, if we stray onto other topics, we don't know what home working is going to look like. We don't know what the messaging is going to look like in terms of people not using or not wanting to use public transport going forward. And at the moment, albeit it's Exchequer funded, there are still private operators providing services for private benefit. And actually, whilst we are one of the few areas in the country where that could change, there needs to be significant steps to make that happen, and those steps aren't going to happen quickly. So in terms of picking up on some of your detail points, so in terms of, Chair, your point around the sort of the funding for the services to improve, pardon me, it's entirely well made, but actually we're just looking at about bringing back the core network and then saying how can we take that step further, because we don't believe the core network as it was previously is meeting our needs and certainly meeting the needs of the growing Greater Cambridge economy. There might be a clear path, Mike outlined earlier in the week, in terms of the general getting back to normal, assuming those dates don't move, but there's no guarantee that public transport patronage, and in our area a lot of that hangs on the busway, because it's the most profitable, it's the most used part, and actually it's used by white collar workers because it gives them timely, reliable journeys into the city, and they may very well be the workers that Dave was talking about who are only going to come back part-time. So the real challenge that we've got is how do we plot a way forward with that? So again, Lucy's point was well made around working with the CPCA, and we are doing that, but none of us yet know the answer. We don't know when Department of Transport are going to withdraw the funding. They've agreed to give 3 months notice, but we don't know when that's going to be. We don't know whether that's partial reduction. We don't know whether that's going to link to fares income. So as patronage and fares income goes up, gradually the Exchequer goes down. We don't know. We don't know what the public transport bus strategy is going to say around, has Whitehall got a plan for franchising the entire country? So that is a key component of our challenge. What we've previously been talking about and what we don't want to lose sight of is where we get to in that future networks. Ian, your points are entirely right around it's a concept and we do need to sharpen it up. And again, in terms of Eileen, if I use the example that Ian gave around Foxton, so our conversations to date on Foxton and developing that travel hub say that we would want to put that in with an enhanced local bus services connecting the local village to that travel hub. But we need to do an awful lot more detail in terms of bringing that to life. So that's the challenge and the dynamic that we've got. I won't deal with Mill Road for now, Chair. Maybe we pick that up later on, and Isabel will now gracefully deal with everything that I've missed.
You. Go on, Isabel.
Well, thank you. I think quite a lot of that is covered. I think that in terms of kind of, where we are on kind of bus support and conversations. So we are speaking to the combined authority and the operators regularly. The first step of it is going to be, you know, what do the operators plan to bring back commercially themselves as they move away from the DFT grant, as Peter was outlining. Kind of once we understand that, then we can start to think about kind of you know, what are the additional steps above that. But those conversations are taking place now, and as we find out more from the DFT in terms of that funding, we'll be able to firm that up. I think Lucy asked about the core network and longer hours on there. So yes, the idea is that you would kind of start with longer hours on the core and try that out. I think that some of the rural connections that kind of have quite a low level of service at the moment, you might also be enhancing those, but not to the same extent, because obviously your kind of demand for that is not the same. But that's not to say that, you know, there shouldn't be some services later at night and things, because it is about kind of people's whole journey. It's proportional there, and I think that that is most of the questions that Peter didn't pick up. But if I have missed something, I'm happy to come back again.
Okay, thank you, Isabel. I've got it. I assume this is a comeback point, Mike, relating to that.
It is, Chair. It's just about page 34 again, and the discussions with operators and the CPCA, Isabel. You didn't explain what you meant by trigger points, and I think that'll be very useful for us to know what you're talking about there. So in effect, when are we expecting action, if you like, and what are the likely actions that they would be? And it would also be useful, and you probably don't know yet, but certainly when Stagecoach tried to relaunch themselves a few years ago, they had big plans for this area. It would also be useful to have the discussion as to what their longer term plans are as well. So we've got the context of them saying, well, yes, we do see Cambridge as a growth area. So we know what their plans are to help us in our planning for moving forward, really. Thanks.
Well, thanks. So in terms of trigger points, we will be working this through as we get more information about the government's kind of unlocking plan. So it does include things like, you know, what is happening with the DFT grant. That would be a trigger point, because that is the point at which we are actually able to do something more. At the moment we're not. Include things like changes to the guidance on taking public transport. It might also include things like footfall in the city centre, kind of some of the mobility data that's published in terms of, you know, visits to workplaces, things like that. So a range of measures, and we'll kind of be firming that up as part of the discussions. In terms of kind of the discussions with Stagecoach on the long and other operators on the long term, I think, you know, we will ask that question. I think from kind of what Peter said earlier, I don't think that most operators have any idea at the moment what their future looks like. They're working on a huge number of scenarios, particularly in Cambridge, where there isn't, you know, there is a lot of jobs that have been done working from home. And over the summer last year, when restrictions were lower, the recovery of the Cambridge network was much lower than the recovery of, for example, the Peterborough network. So I think, you know, we will ask that question, but I think, you know, we need to be realistic that they are working in this incredibly uncertain time, just as we are. And so some of their plans, you know, they might have several things that they would like to do, but they just don't know exactly what they will be able to at the moment.
Thank you, Isabel. I've got one more contributor, and I think I'm going to make that the last on this section, and that's Eileen Wilson.
Yeah, I just wanted to come back on the figure 2, just an explanation of what is what a rural connection is and what a key bus corridor is envisaged to be?
Isabel?
Yes, so in the sister study, they looked at kind of the key corridors, which are the routes that have the biggest flow in terms of the number of passengers. The concept that the sister report looked at was that you have a core network which is based on this biggest flow, and then you have kind of connections from rural areas, from areas where there is lower passenger flow into this core network. So the idea being that you have kind of faster services on the core network, bringing you in to key destinations, but then you have connections that are kind of regular through the rural network, some of which might go directly then onto a key destination, but others of which might involve an interchange point with the key network as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to rule a temporary line under this section. I think we've got a number of threads there which may contribute to what we send to the board. But I think the feeling is that this part of the report is welcomed, but there are some qualifications to that, which we will identify from the notes. So we then go to the next section of the report, which relates to cycling, active transport, and this is covered in paragraph 5.8, and we got the questions earlier about this as well. So could I have any contributions on this? I've got Noel Kavanagh first.
Okay, many thanks. I'm just going to refer to page 31, the table there. I've got two separate points, one to do with the city and one to do with beyond the city. Just looking at Queen's Road, you see that just at the start of the orange section, Queen's Road, the backs. We've got over on the right-hand side, and it's put under cons, as opposed to a pro. There's the statement that potential impact on coach parking. Now, one is, I really welcome the concept of improving the cycling facilities along Queen's Road, hugely busy, but the potential impact on the coach parking, I would say many people would agree that that's a pro, because at the height of the tourist season, and yes, I know currently tourism has had a big hit, but the number of coaches that come into the city, every day, they're like almost like a Trojan horse of pollution, which undermining all the positive things we're aiming to do. I mean, what's the point of having electric bus fleets and encouraging the taxis to go electric, talking about clean air zones, when in fact you've got scores of coaches of all types, from, I don't know, rackety old charabancs up to modern coaches that, I mean, some of them are very, very fine coaches and so on. But I think this could be an opportunity if we are seriously looking at putting good, I would hope maybe even segregated cycle lanes along Queen's Road, to actually move the coaches out of the city, have a coach park beyond the boundaries of the city, and have a kind of shuttle service for the tourists. And a good idea here, a revenue creator here, because I believe, and I believe there's evidence for this, is that many of the sort of day tripping tourists don't really spend much in the city. But if one could actually put a charge on transporting them from the outskirts into the city in small electric shuttle buses, and give them a nominal charge, it will be for the benefit of all. So just have a look at that column there, and maybe you wouldn't see the effect on coach parking as a negative. Look at it another way, as a positive, if it makes us think about what we should be doing, you know, in the future about these coaches that come up in great numbers during the tourist season. Now, the second point I wanted to raise was it's in the light of the fact that you do mention Impington to Milton there. So I know I am pushing up out to the edge of the hinterland of the Greater Cambridge Partnership, but there is a great need for a good, safe cycle route between Willingham and Cottenham. I know I'm going into Councillor Wilson's territory here and Tim Wotherstone's as well, but and I know the County Council has looked into having a cycleway up there, but in the light of the fact that we really are working towards creating networks, you know, on the fringes and beyond the city for cyclists, we really need to be seriously looking at a good, safe, segregated cycle route between Cottenham and Willingham. And in this era when, you know, the electric bike is now becoming common, there are going to be many, many people commuting quite long distances. And we know the very athletic ones are commuting already from, you know, St. Ives into Cambridge and so on. But make it safer for everyone. Make it more for encouraging active travel. Let's have a serious look at a cycle route between Willingham and Cottenham.
Thanks very much.
Thanks,
Noel. Next is Mike Sargent.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to focus on gaps in the cycle network, which I think have been illustrated both by Matt Danish and also Rosalind Lund. I just want to highlight two in my patch, really, and sort of illustrate the approach by the Greater Cambridge Partnership on two schemes, which actually put in schemes with gaps. And before we start on new schemes, we really need to complete the gaps. Otherwise, people will not be using the networks that we put a lot of money into. So that's certainly been the case on Arbury Road. And in it, perhaps an unguarded moment, the officer at the County Council said, well, with Arbury Road, we did the easy bit. And we didn't do the more difficult bit. So the more difficult bit is the eastern end of Arbury Road. So we've ended up with a very high quality cycleway for a large chunk of Arbury Road. And then we get to the eastern end where for many people, they will just give up and think, well, cycling's not for me. It's certainly not for me on this road. And we have the same issue with the Milton Road scheme that hopefully will be starting later in the year. And it is highlighted on page 31 for the proposed North Cambridge scheme, Cheston Road and Cheston High Street, where one of the cons is the deliverability issues, including Mitcham's Corner gyratory. And we will be spending over £20 million on the Milton Road scheme, encouraging people to cycle down Milton Road, and then they will get to Mitcham's Corner and think, where do I go now? It's not safe. Perhaps I won't bother cycling. And this is very much joined up to one of the Tranche 2 schemes, which is to have bus only on Victoria Avenue. So we could well have schemes on Victoria Avenue on Milton Road without a way of getting between the two. So I think we very much got to end up with a network and not a series of measures which don't join up together. I know most interestingly, in terms of the North Cambridge scheme, you're talking about £6 million. The last number I heard for sorting out Mitcham's Corner, getting rid of the gyratory system, making it much better for cyclists and for walking and for local people, was £5 million. I would very much suggest we ought to be picking up those sort of schemes so that we do have a continuous network and not a series of interventions which don't join up. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mike. And next we have Helen Valentine.
I've got three main points in relation to cycling, and I very much support the notion that now is a good time to prioritise further filling in the gaps on these projects. My first one is whether £20 million from us, I know there's mooted monies from elsewhere, is going to be enough, because that would only, if my maths is right, do perhaps 2 out of 10 of these projects, and I'm sure that more than 2 out of 10 are worthy of support. So it's really, is this yet prioritised enough? My second point, and I do declare an interest as a resident of Queen Edith's Way, is that 2 of the top prioritised projects are in my locale, and I very much support the notion that we must improve all routes really into the biomedical campus, and some of them at the moment are very poor, and these 2 are part of that. So from this part of the city, the only route in that is actually been majorly improved is Hills Road, and we all know how much more traffic we're going to be getting into the biomedical campus. And the third one, I guess, is that I know we're all being kind of picky around areas that haven't yet been improved, but I do think if we look at what we've already done, what we've got in train, and what potentially is on here, we are going to be able to look in 3-4 years' time back on our work in Cambridge on the cycle infrastructure with considerable pride. I think we will have made a very big step change, and it'll, I think, be the most visible thing that the GCP will have done at that point in time, because some of the other projects are still yet to get off the ground, as it were. So let's not beat ourselves up too much. I think actually we're doing a pretty good job with the things that are either done already or are likely to be done. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Eileen Wilson. We can't hear Eileen.
I think that works now.
Yes.
Sorry, thank you. I've got a couple of points as well. My first point is about the study, which doesn't appear to have had a lot of local knowledge input into it. And I wondered how much local people have been spoken to on this, because I have received comments that local parish councils weren't aware of any of this, in particular Milton Parish Council. And this leads me on to my next point about the ranking, where on the table we have Milton ranked 3rd and Impington to Milton ranked 7, and this has been a cause of concern because it doesn't seem to take account of students travelling between Milton and Impington Village College, and that's quite an important one. And it concurs with what Councillor Kavanagh was saying about a cycle route between Willingham and Cottenham. Also, it does seem to be very much looking at the fringes of Cambridge, whereas a lot of people do cycle in from much further, and I'd like to see a bit more account taken of people who are cycling from villages further afield. My other point is about it's not just about gaps, it's about where we do have cycle routes. It's about quite often the devil is in the detail. I can give you a couple of examples. They've just built a new primary school in Histon, and the cycle route goes past the school, but cyclists hit 2 big curbs with no dropped curbs, and it just seems like this hasn't been thought through in when it was being designed. The other level bit of detail is on the A14 Histon roundabout, where cyclists travelling north out of Cambridge go across the roundabout and then encounter a very, very narrow pathway coming off the roundabout, where if there is more than one cyclist, it's quite possible that someone will get caught up with the traffic coming off the A14 because the pathway is so narrow, and it wouldn't take a cycle with a trailer, for example, with a child on it. So it's these little details that really hinder the take up of cycling, because if people have to grapple with these details all the time of things that just really hinder their journey, then they might just give up and go back to the car.
Thanks, Eileen. Lucy Netzinger.
Thank you. First of all, I want to absolutely echo what Noel started off with the Queen's Road point on coach parking. Absolutely, removal of coach parking would be a benefit and not a con. That should certainly be in the other category. It's not just about the air quality and the general encouragement of coaches coming into the city. It's also the current coach parking there is really dangerous. It's something that as ward councillors we've been dealing with for ages. They double park, they drop people off into the middle of the road. It is simply dangerous, and it should be moved regardless of whether we're putting a cycle path there. So it should certainly be in the bonus side, not in the other side. Also, I've got a couple more points on the Queen's Road one, which is obviously the one that is closest to my heart. And I think it's I'm very supportive of most of these schemes. I'm very supportive of that scheme too. I think some of what you say about few connections and key trips and relatively low cycling potential, I would challenge on that one. I think it doesn't get used very much by cyclists at the moment because it's not at all a friendly route to cycle, because you're cycling between the traffic and the parked cars, and it feels quite unsafe. And there are alternative routes. The thing is that if it was made a very safe route, people, I'm sure, would use it rather than the alternative routes. And one of those main alternative routes is through the city centre. And actually, when the city centre is busy with pedestrians, trying to encourage cyclists to use Queen's Road instead would be very desirable, because actually the conflict at weekends, the conflict between pedestrians and cyclists in the city centre is considerable, and providing cyclists with that as an alternative route would be really helpful. So I do think that that's a really good potential route and something we should be looking at. It brings me on to the question about whether this really is a look at the missing links. I think that that's a really good missing link, but at the end of it, you then come to the next missing link, which is Northampton Street and Magdalen Bridge, which I don't think is on this list. My suspicion is that that's because it's still in the too difficult category. But I think that we do need to look at that. I mean, you do end up coming out at that Northampton roundabout and at the end of Madingley Road, and then actually the route further on is horrible. Northampton Street is not pleasant for cyclists, and we ought to be trying to work out how to make it better, even if that means reducing the space for cars in that area. That's one of the things that we should be looking at. So I think it's a good analysis, but it still has missing links in it. The final point I want to make is about links between schools. I'm not sure how much those have been considered as part of the key analysis for this, and I think they are really important. I think trying to, particularly to secondary schools, making safe routes to secondary schools is something that should be a high priority for us. Looking at things like the Impington Milton one, I'm not sure how much you've taken that into account when you've done the analysis, but generally supportive with those caveats. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Heather Richards.
Thank you. Just a few brief comments, I think some of which have been touched on. I welcome the idea of consolidating the the funds to really focus on the greatest impact. I guess my fear in that approach is potentially it means that we put forth some schemes, although they may have the greatest impact, looking at the prioritization, they may take the longest to deliver as well. I mean, the number one item on the scheme also happens to be one of the most expensive. I'm wondering if it may be worth taking a look at some of the smaller, dare I say it, quick wins, and that could be actually finding some of those missing links to complete some of the existing cycling infrastructure that we've already put in place, and working somehow in the algorithm that was used to come up with the overall ranking. Actually increase those in terms of importance. I think that one of the key drivers there is that it's actually going to encourage people sooner to start adopting or even continue the cycling that they started now because of the pandemic. And I think if what we're looking to do is actually continue on that existing reduction in car usage that we have, anything that we can put in place sooner rather than later is going to facilitate and actually encourage those habitual behaviors that have already been adopted. My fear is if we kind of take a step back and look at how to spend 20 million at the end of June and deliver something 2 years later, we will have lost all of those gains, where maybe from the public perception, if we can hit some of those quick wins with those missing links to existing infrastructure, we may be able to accelerate that.
Thank you very much, Heather. Tim Wotherspoon.
Yes, thank you. Am I unmuted?
You are.
Thank you very much. Wonderful. Well, it's great to hear how much prominence is being given to the Cottenham question at today's meeting, and you won't be surprised that I'm going to push that one a bit further. I've always taken a field of dreams approach to the cycling network centered on Cambridge. You know, if we build it, they will come. And it's worth remembering that Holland didn't become a nation of cyclists until about 40 years ago. They took a positive decision that they were going to prioritize provision, high quality segregated provision for cyclists. So the same will happen in England. Cambridge and its sub-region are have a prime appetite for increased cycling. We're one of the most active travel dedicated populations in the country, and we are ripe for the high benefit for the relatively small cost of extending the cycling network. So there will always be missing links in the cycle network until every village is connected to every neighbouring village by a high quality cycle route. So I fully support the points that my fellow villager Eileen Wilson has made about slight awkwardness of the route from Cambridge to Cottenham via Histon. But let me say right away how grateful I am to the Greater Cambridge Partnership for the funding that it has already provided for a cycleway which will include a link from Oakington to Cottenham, and I'm delighted to be tracking the progress on providing that particular link. Naturally, I strongly welcome Noel Gallagher, who is of course the County Council cycling champion. I strongly welcome his support for a high quality cycle link from Willingham to Cottenham. It's worth mentioning that the first meeting of the Willingham Community Plan Group, which happened over this weekend, one of the first things it asked for was that high quality cycling link from Willingham to Cottenham. Worth bearing in mind that many many pupils at secondary school from Willingham are educated at Cottenham Village College. And with an eye on what is happening or scheduled to happen on the 6th of May, I would like to set on record that I very strongly support the provision of a high quality segregated cycling route from Willingham to Cottenham. Whilst we're at it, I think it's high time we had a high quality cycling link from Cottenham to the relocated Waterbeach railway station. Don't forget that pre-pandemic, 40% of the customers of Waterbeach railway station, or passengers passing through Waterbeach railway station, came from Cottenham, and many of them, I'm sure, would prefer to cycle to the railway station than take any other form of transport. And not forgetting the final link out of Cottenham to a neighbouring village, it is scheduled on the long list of county council projects, but I really would appreciate a link from Cottenham to Wilburton as well. And that takes us beyond the boundaries of Greater Cambridge into East Cambridgeshire. So let's have all 5 of them, and I'll retire gracefully. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tim. I just point out that Noel Gallagher is someone quite different.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I always get that wrong, don't I? I'm so sorry. No, it's just that I'm of that generation where Oasis was, you know, a group that we listened to non-stop. I do apologise. Thank you.
We know. No, that's all right, Tim. I've got a son called Liam, but not a brother. Sorry.
Okay. So let's. Yeah, I mean, second goes. I'm not accepting at this point. So, Dave, is this your first go on cycling?
Yes, Chair.
Go for it then.
Yeah, I've done a bit on Mill Road Bridge, and I won't say too much about that.
This isn't an opportunity for 4 goes on Mill Road Bridge.
No, but what I'm saying is that I think that the cycling and the lack of traffic on Mill Road has really shown how much we can actually really achieve something if we enter into this debate in a big way. And so, as I said earlier, I'd like to ask us to get involved in the county discussion that still goes on and is due to be solved in June. And at the same time, it would be a disaster if that roadway was opened up again to traffic. It has the biggest footfall in the city as a road. There's 7,000 people a day walk down that road. So I'd like to make that. But I'm going. This is really my go now. I appreciate Tim's optimistic view that one day the links will be provided, and as such it may well be. But Cambridge's been around a long time, and would like to think that we should really try and step up closing those links. I really support the idea that Mitcham's Corner is a nightmare for cyclists, and we need to come up with an answer for that, because all routes almost point to Mitcham's Corner, which in turn points to the city centre. So we need to come up with some idea of how we're going to deal with that. Just briefly on the thing about Mill Road, that we have a lot of bollards on Mill Road, an untidy mess, and GCP could just invest a little bit of money on tidying that up. The county say they don't have the money to do that, but it would be good to see that they invested some money in putting in some infrastructure there, as has happened on other areas in the city where cycling lanes have been built and provided. So I'm asking really for some involvement of the GCP in Mill Road and for something to replace the bollards.
Dave, I know you won't give up on that. So got Heather Williams next.
Thank you. And I'm going to start my contribution with a confession. I'm a really bad cyclist. I'm awful and terrible. And the thought of going on a road, and especially with my toddler, who's 3, would absolutely petrify me and would completely put me off. So I think it's really important we do things like this if we're really going to get long-term change, because people like me need to really practice. Toddlers need to learn. Children need to learn, and I absolutely echo what was said about secondary schools. I think that's a really important link in if we want to get generational change on this. And I'm going to need to take some tips, because Councillor Wotherspoon, I know, cycles everywhere. He doesn't cycle, so he's the most active cycler I know. So I need those tips, Tim. But I do also think it's what I sometimes are referred to as fund to finish. On what was mentioned about the amount of funding we have and public expectation, it's really important that we know we can finish these projects and in a timely way. What we don't want to start off with is lots of things everywhere that's not really connected, and then we don't get that final bit. So I think whatever we do, don't like that double do, but there we go. We need to make sure that we're secured and we can finish it and it's going somewhere, even if that means we have to start off smaller. Better that than end up with lots and really nothing. So just to echo those bits really, but it is important that we take people with us. So the consultation on this needs to be really good, and we need people to buy into it.
Thank you, Heather. And lastly, Lucy Scott.
Hi. Just really talking from the education sector, it's really interesting to hear about the comments about secondary schools, because actually if you do want generational change, that's the obvious place to start. And Cambridge does have a travel to learn policy. So we actually encourage students to travel to sixth form education and so on. And so if you don't get those cycle routes right, you are adding to the travel chaos, essentially. And the Impington to Milton, for example, I mean, we're busing children on some of those routes. So actually, it seems such an obvious place to start with those missing links. So I certainly concur with the comments so far.
Thank you, Lucy. So before turning it over to, I think, Isabel, who I hope has taken good notes from all this to make sure everything's covered, I just wanted to sort of add on top of that, it would be really helpful, I think, given the number of the contributions, if you were able to spell out a bit more detail what would happen between now and when these schemes are consulted on in the summer, both in respect of understanding what can be afforded and in understanding any changes to what we're looking at now. And what is the expected nature of that consultation? Because are we talking about laying out a series of schemes that we propose to deliver within the money that we've got, and asking for just comments on those? Or are we also asking for wider comments which enable people to contribute to schemes that maybe aren't there and people think should be, or schemes that should be somehow different from how we're seeing them? I think that would kind of help all of us with our communities understand how to tell people what to expect here and what the nature of their input is going to be and when that can happen. So over to you, Isabel. Did you say something outrageous? I'm not going to go to anyone else on the cycling subject. So thank you.
Cool, thank you. I think it's been a really helpful discussion, and I think probably a preview of some of what we might hear through a public consultation. So it's good to hear some of those things now. And I think actually I might start with your point, Tim, about kind of what might happen between now and then, and what will the consultation also say. I think it's important to kind of keep this in the context of one of the points that I made earlier, that the point that was made by Helen, that there is already a considerable amount of GCP funding going into the cycling network, and over the next 10 years there is going to be a huge change in the kind of quality of provision, particularly the provision going out to the villages and along those 4 corridor schemes as well. So this study is done in the context of that, as well as in the context of things like the County Council's Active Travel Programme and others. And I think that the question that we want to kind of take to the public is, when you considered the future investment strategy back in December, we had a conversation about, the city deal funding is relatively constrained. There is going to be potentially be some trade-offs in future. We have the opportunity to spend a small amount more to consolidate that investment that we're already making, but we alone cannot address all of the gaps in the cycle network. It's going to take funding from other partners, from other sources over a period of time to continue to enhance that over the coming years. So the question really is, in terms of the GCP and the city deal funding, where are we going to prioritise that spend? And I think that we will. The study will help to inform that consultation, but I imagine that it wouldn't be a true consultation if we didn't invite people to make comments about schemes they felt should be included that aren't on that list. So I think between now and kind of when that consultation goes out, we'll obviously be kind of reflecting on the comments that have been made here, and we will be putting together a plan to not only have kind of an online consultation, but also to talk to key groups such as the parish councils that Eileen mentioned, who we would be engaging as part of the next stage of this. So I think there is the question of is a kind of circa £20 million in investment the right amount? And I think that question will come back to you once we've had the consultation and reflected on that, and when we're a kind of another period into the city deal, and we have more of a sense of what budget is actually going to be available to us to be able to do some of that work. So hopefully those comments pick up quite a few of the points. Just to kind of go into some of the more specific points that were made, I think in terms of Queen's Road, I think the reason why the coach parking is listed as a con is because it's a challenge to deliverability. It's very difficult to deliver a high quality scheme on Queen's Road unless you move the coach parking, and moving the coach parking it isn't necessarily easy. What I would say is that I understand that kind of the City Council and the new Visit Cambridge brand are looking at putting together a destination management plan, which would look at things like how do coaches and tourists access the city in the future. So, we will be kind of liaising with the team doing that, because obviously the two things are really linked in there. I think there were lots of very helpful suggestions for additional routes that to be prioritised, which we can reflect on. I think one of the points was around education and how that's been factored in. I think that my understanding is that the tool does look at kind of potential cycle flows, and that's not just commuters, but I think it's something that we should look at specifically given the comments here, so that we're able to kind of reflect that. And it's also something we can ask about in the consultation in terms of the sorts of this, not just kind of specifically which routes, but also the sorts of things that people would want to see prioritised, the sorts of routes they would want to see prioritised as well. And yeah, I hope that it's given a sense of kind of what we might be asking people, how we might be asking people, and how some of these links might be addressed, not just by us but by others over a period of time. Hopefully that has picked up almost everybody or everyone's points there.
Thank you very much, Isabel. I try and sum up this segment. I think that I think everyone here is really supporting this direction that is being followed. There seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for the concept of completing missing links. Then it wouldn't be Cambridge if we hadn't had a lot of then equally enthusiastic individual pitches for particular parts of the network where there are missing links. And I think that we will sort of piece those together and make sure that they're inputted to the board, and particularly trying to pick out some thematic points where it's possible to do so in doing that. So thank you, everyone, and almost everyone contributed to that discussion. So that's a measure of the enthusiasm. I'm going to suggest we take 5 minutes now before we go on to the next section to talk about discouraging car use in the city. I will, at the start of that, be reminding you that after we finish the 2 further segments of this report, there are 3 whole other items on the agenda. So what seemed like a lighter agenda is now all of a sudden quite a demanding one. So we need to perhaps take into account that when we manage the next section. So I think we should restart again at 20 to 4.
you want to start again, Chair?
I'm sorry, Chair, you're on mute.
I was saying yes. Yes, please. We're at time.
We have resumed.
We live now?
Yes, we are, Chair.
Okay, let's resume the discussion of the public transport improvements and city access strategy. And we got to the section of the report which I've shorthanded it as about discouraging car use in the city area. I just wanted to ask a question of Isabel before we start that, because it probably helps to have a clear understanding of what we're discussing before we get on with it. Look, I'm looking at the top of page 26 of the report, Isabel. The section with little b by the side of it and the bullet points. I just wonder whether you could just say something very briefly to help us really understand and illustrate for us what a revised network hierarchy for Cambridge, kind of what that might consist of, because I think that's quite important if you want a view about it. I'm assuming that the second bullet point is the sort of thing generically like we've seen on an experimental basis using government money in various places in the city already. And I'm assuming that the parking point must be broadly intended when we talk about an integrated, but we're talking about less parking, I guess, there. I mean, these are rather smooth kind of technocratic expressions, and I just think to understand what we're maybe saying we like and don't like, we need to understand a little bit more what they look like.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Chair. So in terms of the network hierarchy, what that piece of work would look at is kind of taking the road network as a whole. How are different roads kind of used in terms of kind of both movement and in terms of kind of the other kind of space users of that road? So, you know, you have your kind of key roads which are really important for access. You might have some that are kind of more places that people dwell and spend time, your kind of local high streets like Mill Road and places like that. You have these different kind of types of road, and what it would do is kind of look at the road network as a whole and reflect on you know, how is it categorized at the moment, and how should it be categorized on the basis that you know, we want more people to be traveling by public transport, by walking and cycling, and kind of a range of other benefits that you might get from that. It is a piece of work that, you know, the county council would lead as the highway authority, but that we have you know, we as GCP would have kind of a clear kind of input to that, and it would come here and to the executive board for discussion, as well as to the county council's committees as well. I think the importance of that is that it kind of sets a strategic framework to then take forward the second bullet point in terms of the programme of road space reallocation. So kind of we think about how these different things interact, and what does, you know, if we kind of put a bus gate in one place, how is that actually improving that whole journey for that bus, and what is happening to the traffic that then no longer uses that route? So kind of thinking about it as a whole system. So some of those schemes might be brought forward in a similar way in terms of experimental measures, but some might be brought forward using a kind of a more kind of ordinary times traffic regulation procedure to do those as well, kind of including public consultation and things like that. In terms of the parking strategy, there are kind of obviously several ways in which kind of parking affects kind of people's choice of mode. So you know, the availability of it, the price of it, how easy it is to kind of to access, how reliable it is that you know, it can be used, etc. I think that in doing that piece of work, we have to be also very mindful of the fact that the parking income is important to both the city and the county councils, and so it might be, so kind of in terms of looking at those things, that's why we want to do it as a kind of an integrated parking strategy that looks at you know, across the board as a whole, how could this be better managed to prioritize, to kind of encourage people to take sustainable transport, so potentially to, you know, park at a park and ride and come in rather than drive all the way in, things like that. So it is it's not just kind of less car parking. It might be less car parking, it might be car parking in different places, it might be kind of different car parking pricing, but that's something that all needs to be kind of worked through as part of doing the strategy.
Okay, thank you very much, Isabel. Are there any contributions on this section? I don't see any. Okay. I just wanted to make a comment. I mean, I feel that, oh, sorry, I have one from Christopher Walkinshaw. Let's take Christopher.
Couldn't find the raise hand button. I was unclear whether to raise this at this point or more generally. I think this is a really important part of the process, and remembering that we the GCP are here to create some long-term improvements and to deal and recognise the growth we've got in the Greater Cambridge area. Obviously, we have a short-term hiccup, and none of us can predict exactly what will come there. But it does come back to the thing we've talked about many times, which is this is about persuading very large numbers of people to make different choices, and then making it really easy and effective for the alternate choices they make to work well. And reallocation of roads, I think, is an interesting one, because when, as Isabel's just talked about, prioritising which roads are principal access routes or thoroughfares or whatever, where you could increase the flow of people on bicycles, buses, whatever, maybe removing parking completely from some of those roads could be a really good way of doing that. But actually, it ties in with the other bits, which is the importance of the scale of this. I resisted coming in on 5.7, where we talk about adding 159 spaces to Bayburn Park and Ride. I appreciate that's relatively short term. Our last meeting, Isabel confirmed we're actually planning 11,000 new extra spaces, because those are the numbers we've got to do within the current plan. We are anticipating, forgive me, I think it's 43,000 additional homes in this area alone by 2030, so within the field that we've got here. And unless we provide proper alternatives, then more of those people will use the cars to get through. So I'm sorry, I sound like a stuck record on this at every meeting, but this is about doing things that helps thousands of people every day make difference, not just ones and twos. So actually, I welcome particularly this review of the whole road network as to which ones need to be cleared so that they can maximise the throughput of people, whether that's bicycling, cycling, scooters, or walking, or buses, or cars, as a way of getting around the city, because we can't have the city just grind to a halt. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher. And I've got Noel Kavanagh and then Tim Wotherspoon.
Yeah, this is on that third category you created, was it, the 5.9?
5.9 to 5.12, yeah.
Yeah, the discouraging car use. Yeah, I take the point that has just been made by Isabel about a longer term parking strategy, but I've got a big concern about that, in that up until last March, we had a rolling programme, as everyone's aware, of residence parking schemes being implemented. And then because of decision made by County Council with the combined authority behind, the impending schemes were put on hold, which a huge number of residents who were very much in favour of residence parking schemes were very, very disappointed by, because many people across the city, who not only live in zones where there are residence parking schemes, but those who actually live next to them, are very aware just how effective they are in, cutting pollution, to actually having disciplined parking. I mean, areas where there are residence parking schemes in place, I mean, you don't have the verges being churned up with subsequent cost of repairs of those verges and so on. So it was hugely disappointing that that decision was made to stop the implementing of schemes. And parochially, I had one in my jurisdiction where residents had voted by a majority during a informal consultation to go to the next stage. So, you know, in the spirit of, how should I say, trying to follow the desires of our citizens, like we're trying to follow the desires of the Citizens' Assembly. I mean, my local citizens in one of the zones, they wanted to proceed to have the opportunity to decide whether or not to go to a formal consultation, and that was denied them. And the thing with the residence parking schemes are, they are a positive net in this these strategies for us to be cutting pollution, cutting congestion, and making our city a better place to live. So I really did applaud Greater Cambridge Partnership sponsoring the installing of the schemes up until the decision made to not to proceed. And it's just, how should I say, in the world of decision making, I don't think it's that positive a thing for you to be putting aside the £200,000 that was earmarked for installing further residence parking schemes, because it's kind of given a signal out to residents who are going to be wary about the fact that those successful residence parking schemes that are in place won't be added to. And
well, we're going to come to that point later on the agenda under the quarterly report. So could we just take that point there?
Yeah, if you want to, if you can see this as an introduction to it, but it's I'm raising it here. I am aware it is later on in the.
We're coming back to it. Don't worry. Okay, thanks. So I'm going to go to Tim Witherspoon.
Yes. Am I here yet?
Yep.
Yes, I don't want to go into the nitty-gritty of the County Council's position on residence parking schemes, but I'd just like to point out that it is scheduled for the next meeting of the Highways and Transport Committee on the 9th of March, residence parking schemes review, and Councillor Kavanagh, have I got the name right? Yes, Councillor Kavanagh is a member of that committee. So I'm hoping that there will be progress at that meeting. I just wanted to mention that the Citizens' Assembly voted by a very clear margin that its top preferred scheme was reallocation of road space, and in particular closing roads to cars. If you followed the three charging mechanisms, an integrated car parking strategy was the third on the list. If you take all the charging schemes, bracket them as two, if you see what I mean. So reallocation of road space has clear support from the Citizens' Assembly, and I would just like to flag that up.
Great, thank you, Tim. Lucy Nethsinger.
Thank you. I just wanted to say how much I welcomed what Christopher Wilkinshaw had to say about the absolute urgency of making sure that we recognise that the need to discourage cars from coming into the city is a high priority for not just for kind of air quality issues in Cambridgeshire, but also for allowing us to manage growth. And I do think it is incredibly important that that message gets across to the County Council, who the leadership of the County Council seem absolutely determined not to recognise that fact. And it is a fact that if we are going to have the levels of growth around Cambridge that are planned and that are a requirement for not only this Greater Cambridge Partnership, but also for the Combined Authority, that in order to make that manageable and feasible, we have to consider ways of discouraging cars from coming into the city centre. Otherwise, it will simply gridlock. And I think it is incumbent on all of us to get that message across to the county council leadership, because they just don't seem to be willing to recognise that at the moment. And there are a number of ways in which they are blocking things that will take us down that path. And those blocks must be removed, and that's a duty on all of us. And I know that Noel and I are busy doing our job for kind of batting that particular thing at the county council, but I think some help from business and from other members of this board who may have other mechanisms of getting to the county council leadership would be really welcome on that particular issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Finally, Eileen Wilson.
I just want to ask, is this a good point for me to talk about the travel hubs, or are we going to come on to those?
I'm afraid you've missed your chance on.
All right, okay.
Yeah. No one had any comments on them, so I really feel we need to stay on track with the with where we're going on this one. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm now just like to ask a question before going back to Isabel. I mean, I share the desire to create the sort of the kind of less polluted, more tranquil environment that we can do. Clearly, we can do provide in some parts of the city, and I endorse where this bit of the report is going. But I do think that to do this properly, we're going to need to make sure that doing it doesn't just put more congestion on fewer roads, because that is not optimizing the outcome for the city at large. And if those fewer roads also happen to be the ones that are carrying public transport, then we are going to have a struggle to deliver both on this bit of our agenda and the bit which is about improving the public transport effectiveness. So, I mean, I think it doesn't mean that what's being proposed here is bad, but I just think it's all about how it's done. And I do have this concern out there that the elements of demand management that are included in this section are ones that we have previously recognised and officers have reported to us as amongst the mildest possible in their effect on congestion. And so we will still be lacking an overarching method of demand management for car use in the city. And that's why, you know, there may ultimately still be a question that this doesn't answer, which if all the cars don't suddenly evaporate, they are still going to be there and they're just going to be on fewer roads. And that isn't good news for the people that live on them. So I would like to add that in and then go to Isabel to make her final comments.
Yep. So thank you, everyone. I think there's been some helpful comments there in terms of informing how we take the work forward, particularly about the scale of the challenge. And I think there is a very good point that you know, although I talked through the paper in sections and you've discussed the paper in sections, this is about a package, and it is about providing people with an alternative, not just kind of doing these things as well. So so I think that's helpful in terms of addressing some of the points about, you know, making sure that we are, you know, still moving thousands of people, or you know, which we are going to need to do very likely, however kind of working from home turns out after this, and in terms of kind of, you know, not just moving the congestion, but actually kind of moving people's modes. So you know, that is something. And as we said at the beginning, as we come out of the pandemic and we start to kind of understand, you know, what are some of those longer term impacts in terms of how people are working and traveling, you know, we can come back to you, you know, and look at kind of how does this plan stack up, and you know, do we need to ask you to go further at that point.
Thank you very much, Isabel. We'll now go to the fourth section, which is about air quality. So please don't just contribute if you think you're against pollution, because I think that probably we all are. I'd like to just add value to what the report says in this respect. Are there any points on that? So I've got Mike Sargent.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to focus on 5.14 on page 33, which is around buses and moving to zero emissions. And obviously there are major challenges there. I'm also conscious at the moment, because park and rides aren't operating, there's a lot more Euro 6s actually operating on the ordinary network. And really I want to narrow down as to what we mean by a short-term milestone of moving to Euro 6. We are certainly hopefully going to see more buses on the roads in the forthcoming year, and short term to me is a matter of months rather than years. So I would like to know what the plans are, when we expect to have an agreement with the providers on moving to Euro 6. I'd also like to ask why we didn't actually bid for the monies for an electric bus fleet. It was successfully done by Oxford. When I say we, that's not necessarily the GCP, but the Combined Authority, etc., all the relevant local authorities. Why didn't we bid for the government money for an electric bus fleet for Cambridge, while Oxford did and were successful? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I don't have any other contributions, so I'll just like to add mine on this one. I mean, I'm noting this expression, work with bus operators. I mean, that has been available to well, us and to the county council, presumably the combined authority, for quite a long time. And it's kind of not a new measure, working with them to do this. I mean, it seems that I hear of lots of other cities taking actions like establishing clean air zones, and that's having the effect of distributing fleet operators' vehicles away from those places and towards places that haven't got those zones. And I just I'm concerned that this is maybe an extremely softly sounding piece of the report, which I'm not quite clear why we believe now this is going to take us much further forward than it has in the past. Isabel.
Cool, thank you. So in terms of moving to Euro 6, I think the aim here is months rather than years. I think that it's possible to upgrade buses, not just to buy new buses. That's considerably cheaper to do. So you know, we are discussing those options with operators at the moment, and you know, hope to be able to identify kind of which buses and the cost of that, subject to kind of the exec board approval next month. Why didn't we bid for money for the electric bus fleet? I think you're right, the GCP was not eligible to bid, the combined authority was. My understanding is that the combined authority didn't feel that Cambridge would be eligible for the funding, because one of the criteria was that you had to be able to upgrade your entire fleet within a certain funding envelope, and the quantity of buses that operate on the network here takes you beyond that. Obviously, Oxford and Coventry have been successful, so you know, we will be looking at kind of how they did that bid, and I'm sure the combined authority will be too. And we do anticipate that there will be more government funding for electric buses in the coming years. So hopefully, you know, we can learn from their experiences, and you know, be in a position to bid next time. In terms of kind of the working with, I think, you know, Tim, I think you're right. It's not a new measure, but I think that there's two parts to that paragraph. One is the working with, and the other is the options appraisal of you know, how we might kind of enforce something and move something forward. And I think that the key thing there is that there are a range of ways in which we can kind of say to operators that they need to meet a particular target. But it comes back to kind of what we were talking about earlier, in the situation that they're in the moment. Operators don't have any money at the moment to put into buses. So this is going to need to be done in a partnership way. Even if we do set some harder measures and targets later on, it's going to need to be kind of a support in there as well. So the intention of that paragraph is to reflect both of those things, but it's certainly not just doing the kind of working with support part. It's going to be both, but we need to work out exactly what that looks like.
Very good. Thank you, Isabel. So now I said that there would be an opportunity for contributions about how all this fits together. Please, not an opportunity to go back over what we've discussed or you might have forgotten to say earlier on. This is kind of taking a new angle at the package in total. So I've got Mike Sargent and then Karen Kennedy.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, obviously, one of our focuses in the last year or two has been around the Citizens' Assembly. The Citizens' Assembly said be bold, and I just don't get the sense with the City Access that we are being bold. I think they would be disappointed if they heard our discussions and read the report today. Why did we spend that time, if you like? Because things just aren't happening. You know, Isabel talked about starting to plan and come back later and not a big bang. And, you know, as I said earlier, things are moving fast now. You know, the government has set a date, the 21st of June, when all restrictions will be removed. And on page 25, the report quite accurately says there is a risk of a car-based recovery. Okay, I'm not reassured today that we will be taking any actions for that not to happen. I note very much the comments from Peter Blake, really, which seems to be indicating there are lots of things that mean that we may not be able to, and those sort of comments, really. And you know, we do need to be bold, Chair, and come up with a package of measures. The board did approve a package of measures at its meeting last February. I think things have moved on, but I think this is a once in a generation opportunity, as Councillor Bajan and others have talked about the impact of the pandemic on people's travelling patterns. We need to be in a position as we come out of all the restrictions to give an alternative to the car. And I don't think we are at the moment. Isabel's talked about the triggers, but I just feel as though we'll hear the triggers and we won't be in a position to do anything when the triggers arrive. When the government actually says, right, we're moving back to allowing people on buses, for instance, we won't have an offer. And certainly on page 35, we have a long list of things which we will be talking about looking at from July onwards. And really, I think we need to be looking at things that we can deliver for when people are let off the leash, if you like. So as I said earlier, I'd like to make a proposal to go to the board, Chair, if that's okay.
Well, we haven't got anything in front of us, Mike. Is it a long thing?
No.
Okay, so tell us what it is.
Right, so the Greater Cambridge Partnership acknowledges there's a clear risk of a car-based recovery without action. And we now know it's likely that all COVID restrictions will be removed by the 21st of June 2021. The Greater Cambridge Partnership Joint Assembly therefore calls on the Greater Cambridge Board to implement the short-term city access interventions agreed at the board on the 19th of February 2020 or equivalent measures by 21st of June 2021 to ensure there is not a car-based recovery in Greater Cambridge. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Now, we do have a sort of, I don't know whether, perhaps I could take Rachel's advice on this. We've not normally taken things like this from the floor, have we? Are we okay to do this?
If yes, Chair, if members of the Assembly wish to support that, then you can use it as a reference to go to the board, certainly.
Okay, that's fine. So I'll ask first for if there is a seconder for what Mike has suggested.
Yes.
Okay, so I've got a seconder. So I'm going to continue with other contributions, and we'll come back to that before we finish. So I've got Karen next.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess I'm obviously one of the newer members of the Assembly, and I'm still learning about how everything fits together, all the different activities. But one of the things that I just like to make a bit of a plea for is that when we are thinking about our activities that we do, it's been mentioned a couple of times already about thinking about a bit more of a systems and holistic approach. There's been a couple of examples today, or at least making it clearer for ourselves and our ultimate beneficiaries, how we're doing that. There was a couple of examples already today in the discussions where things have come up that might seem to be going contrary to what we are trying to achieve, the cycling and the coaches, how the overall cycling infrastructure will integrate both within what we're trying to do, but also other parties. So just a plea that we do take that approach, that we try to take that integrated approach where it's possible, but also that we make it a bit clearer how we're doing that so that everybody can see that we're taking that approach both for us, but our beneficiaries as well, please.
Okay, thank you, Karen. And now I've got no other contributions at this point. No one else wished to comment. I've got Ian Solemn.
Could I just request someone or could Mike share the text in some way, or could someone sort of could he share it with the host so the host can put it up on the screen?
Yes, I can't answer this question. Is there something available, Mike?
I could share it, Chair, if I've got control. I'll try, shall I?
Yep.
Hopefully I won't share things which I don't want people to see.
Oh, we're watching carefully.
Yeah, well, don't use it in evidence. Can you see that?
Just about.
Only just.
Really?
Quite small.
Okay, that's fine. I'll how about that?
That's better, yeah.
Sorry, just have a brief summary of what was agreed on the 19th of February, because obviously I wasn't present, so I don't really know what I'd be agreeing to. That's okay.
I could sort of summarise that a little bit, Chair, if that's useful.
Well, it really is a bit difficult, Mike, if we, I think it's fair for people to have some chance to read through it, because I recall this was quite a read. Could you would have been really helpful to have circulated this in advance, I think.
Sorry, Chair, yes, you're right.
Chairman, could I ask you the motion again? I hadn't quite got to the end of it. Thank you.
My understanding is that that decision by the board on the 19th of February was laying out a long-term strategy, which is unlike. I mean, is that a bit optimistic to expect a long-term strategy to be implemented by the 21st of June?
Chair, should we go back to normal view, and do you want to ask Isabel to just briefly comment on that as to what was agreed in February?
Yes, okay, I'll take that advice.
Mike, can you stop screen sharing? Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you. So I don't have the paper from February in front of me, so I might not cover everything, but as part of the paper in February, as Mike said, that there was an agreement to proceed with some short-term measures. Those then came back to you in June last year, after the pandemic had begun, so that they could be kind of looked at again in that context. We are proceeding already with the majority of them, so it included things like road space reallocation, and that was picked up through the active travel programme. additional cycle parking, where we're doing some work around where we might add that in the city centre, potentially at workplaces too. Things like a play street scheme, and several other things. That items in there that were not picked up were mostly around at this stage were mostly around the public transport, and again that was for the reasons outlined. So we did say at that point things like investing in expanding services and operating hours, and we have not been able to proceed with that because of the DfT regulations and the restrictions on use of public transport at the moment. So I think that that was the kind of areas covered and the context in terms of where we then took those in June.
I'm not sure. I mean, hearing that, Mike, I'm just not sure that this takes us anywhere new on specifics. I mean, I think that I think it's more possible to see that there would be a consensus today if you were proposing that we, in order to avoid the first bit of what you worded, and a call on the board to be bolder, because I think it's quite difficult to drum up specifics when we kind of heard from Isabel that some of the ones referred to are already in process, and others are things that are subject to the report that people have supported today. But to say that we would like them to work be bolder or even faster and bolder, that might be the best we can do, rather than drum up detail in the course of a meeting with 14 or 15 of us.
If I can come back, Chair, I mean, I suppose, you quite rightly said it would have been good to have this in advance. And I think a lot of the report was written in the light of lots of unknowns, and we didn't know where we were going in terms of the pandemic. There is now a clear path out of the situation with a deadline. And I'm very concerned that on page 34 and 35, the next steps and milestones are very much talking about measures which won't come in until late in this year or into 2022. And I was very concerned reading the papers and listening to the Prime Minister on Monday that we were in the situation of being concerned that it would be a car-driven recovery, but we had nothing in the report which would actually negate it. And it would look as though the Greater Cambridge Partnership is not responding. We know that many bodies over the last year or so have had to respond very quickly, and we look leaden foot at the moment, and it's a matter of getting people to a stage where they've got opportunities for alternatives when they come back. And I just feel that we won't have these alternatives available to people, and potentially we will have people using cars more rather than less than the early part of 2020. So I'm happy to talk about adjustments, Chair, but I do think the Greater Cambridge Partnership Board knows, as you quite rightly say, that we need to be more bold. So I'm happy to adjust to adjust the wording slightly so that the board is taking on measures by the 21st of June 2021 to ensure there is not a car-based recovery in Greater Cambridge.
So Mike, I think that the points that you're making are ones that we may well have a consensus here for. If what we want to say to the board is that we want them to be bolder and to have a speedier impact, thinking of the 22nd of June trigger point, in particular in relation to alternatives to it being a car-based recovery. But I think to start writing this down and kind of doing motions in a collective like this is going to be really difficult. So I think it's going to be, I'll ask for a show of hands around getting those messages across, but I think that we simply need to take that as either a consensus or not, and then move on. So if that is acceptable to you, could I ask members to indicate, is that something that they would be happy to ask the board to, happy to have sent to the board as our view?
Tim, can I just clarify that what you're asking for is a view on a bolder vision, not the specific wording that's in the motion?
Exactly, a bolder vision with a speedier impact, thinking particularly of the 22nd of June trigger point, and thinking particularly about the need for alternatives for it to be a car-based economy, which I think enshrine the thrust of what Mike is proposing, which I think is important personally. And I do think it's appropriate pressure to apply, because I think it's part of our role.
Chair, I wouldn't want to get in the way of democracy, but I think we need to be clear about the position on public transport, and that it is incorrect to say that the GCP is leaden foot. Nobody has a recovery plan for public transport, because it is entirely underwritten by the Exchequer. So the biggest transport authority in the world, TfL, doesn't have one. They don't have one in Greater Manchester. They don't have one in Merseyside or anywhere else, which is why we're working with partners to be prepared for messages that come out of the Treasury, and they may come out next week, out of DFT when it produces its national bus strategy. But there is no clear plan for a public transport recovery at the moment. And without that clear plan for public transport recovery, which is at the centre of ours and everybody else's sustainable transport plan, we're in a little bit of a quandary. So I mean, clearly it's for the Assembly to reflect on it, but for the Assembly to send a clear message to the board to be bolder and faster and everything else, when that's not within the board or anybody else's gift outside of Whitehall, probably feels a little bit unfair as we sit here today.
Well, I would thank you very much, Peter. I just would like to kind of bring this to a point where we know what we're going to do. So
can I come back then?
Members have heard what you've said. Mike, I'll take your point, and then I'm going to move to ask for an opinion from the group as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I very much take on board, Tim, what you've suggested. As I said before, we have been overtaken by events, if you like, from when the reports came to this committee. And I think it would be wrong to not take into account what was announced on Monday. There is a trigger point, if you like, and it's important that the papers that go to the board and the decisions of the board reflect that potential trigger point. And there are actions which are to be carried out in time for the 21st of June, such that we are doing the best we can to stop a car-based recovery. I know what Peter says, but really I think we want the board to give him the authorisation, and Rachel and the other officers, that at the appropriate stage they can quickly react to changes from the government. Hopefully they will have plans in their back pocket with different options, if you like, so that we do have a package available for the 21st of June, and we don't have to wait until the end of the year or even into 2022. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, so I want to go to the what I said I was going to do, and there may be support for that, there may be not, but would it be the wish of the Assembly collectively to ask the board to apply boldness and speed to get in place actions that can make a difference in relation to the 22nd of June, in particular focusing on alternatives to this being a car-based recovery? So I'm not going to rephrase that any further. If that is something that you're happy with going back as a message to the board, could you indicate with your hand up, please? sorry, the hands up function, because otherwise I can't really see. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and I would be a fifth to that.
Chairman, can I just say I lost connection, so I'm slightly behind on all of this. So I did have my hand up earlier to get clarification because my bandwidth, I think, dropped. So okay. if you could call me out on this one or count me out, because I'm not sure where we're at or what's happening.
Those who would feel uncomfortable with that being a message to go back to the board, please. 1, 2, 3. Uncomfortable. That's 3. Is that only 3? I think on the screen. Yeah. Okay.
I'll just take mine down, Chair. There we are.
Sorry. Can I ask for those who would be uncomfortable with that message again? Sorry, because it. Oh, no one now. Fine. Okay. So the board, the assembly wishes to send that message to the board, and I will make sure that it is sent. So thanks very much, Mike, for triggering that. And now, were there any other comments required, or can we move on to the next item? Quickly, the next item, I think. So the next item is the quarterly progress report, starting on page 107. It's going to be introduced by Neve. Are you there, Neve?
They're just joining, Chair. Just bear with us a second.
We surprised her with the speed that we finished.
I know Neve's having some connection problems, actually. Is she?
Yeah, no, but we've kind of resolved those by another route. So she's just been moved in from the waiting room, but seems to have disappeared.
Someone's got a blank. Oh, it's Dave. Okay. Okay, well, we're going to start with the, is that Neve? Are you there now, Neve?
Chair, I've just, she's lost her connection again.
Do you want to move anyway to take Michael Page's question, Chair?
Yes, on the basis that Michael sent in his question beforehand, I'm assuming Neve is aware of that. And so let us start. So welcome to Michael Page. Would you like to ask your question, Michael?
Yes, Chair, thank you. My question relates to pages 123 and 129 of the agenda pack. Paragraph 12.8 states that in order to manage network capacity, construction of Milton Road was delayed to coincide with completion of the Histon Road works. And the following paragraph 12.9 states that the Histon Road works remain on schedule for completion by the summer of this year, most likely in June, I believe. However, in paragraph 15.9, there is an assumption stated that construction on Milton Road will not begin until April 2022, which is approximately 10 months later. You may remember that public consultation on the Milton Road project started more than 5 years ago, in December 2015, and was followed by years of hotly debated but eventually productive work between the project team and stakeholders, including residents associations and the local liaison forum. This resulted in a final concept design and strategic outline business case approved by the executive board in the summer of 2018. Then a final design, including landscaping, was approved by the board in March 2019, and a frozen 2D design was released in June 2020, last year. So question 1 to the officers, what is the reason for a further 10-month delay to the start of construction? Is it really necessary after all the time that has been available to prepare during the Histon Road works? And question 2 to Assembly members, are you content to allow yet another year to pass by before construction starts on what should be a shovel-ready, oven-ready project, while sections of Milton Road continue to crumble and disintegrate. By the way, safety for cyclists is severely compromised at the moment and does not encourage a shift to active travel modes. And as a footnote, could I just remind you that when senior GCP executives were recruited back in 2017 and 18, their primary mission was stated as being all about delivery. I hope we're not going to get delayed based upon reflecting on the hierarchy of the road network. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm now going to welcome County Councillor Ian Manning to the meeting, and he has requested to speak on this item. Ian, I'm sure you're going to direct us to what part.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for using your discretion to let me speak. Yes, I'm actually going to, I think, repeat something that Governor alluded to earlier in one of the earlier debates, which is on page 129 to 130 of the report. So it's 15.12, and this is specifically this recommendation to move the unspent element of the residence parking allocated bit of the city centre access budget back into the general pot. I'm very concerned about this because the majority group on the county council voted last year to delay this for what I believe were essentially political reasons, and we then fast forward a year and we have a paper coming to the March Highways and Transport Committee about the next steps for this. We think 4 options in it, the last draft I saw. I'm very concerned that if we do, and those options, some of those options when I saw the last draft do actually mention concerns around definite allocated budget. So I'm very concerned that if the Assembly and the board goes along with this recommendation, that will be used as an excuse to further delay residence parking implementation, because they'll be able to say that they haven't got definite funding. I take the officer's point in the report about, a wider strategy and take alongside other priorities, but please do remember that this is a project that was midway through, and because it's midway through, there are many pockets across the city where one set of residents have a residence parking scheme and another set of residents right nearby don't, and therefore the pressure on them has become pressure on parking in their area has become completely intolerable, and an impact on those residents' quality of life. So I please would really beg the Assembly to recommend that the board do not allow this budget to be moved back into the main pot. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Now I saw that Niamh had joined us in the meantime, so she didn't miss the questions. Niamh, would you like to respond to Councillor Manning and to Michael Page?
Thank you, Chairperson. I don't think you can see me, but can you hear me okay?
We can.
You can, good. Yeah, so just to take the first question, and thanks to Michael and Jocelyn for that joint question. The suggested slight delay in the commencement of the construction on Milton Road, it kind of follows previous concerns from a number of stakeholders that we really ought not to run 2 major schemes, both to the north of the city, back to back, without allowing what we're sort of describing as a settling in period following the completion of Histon Road. So really, what we think a gap in the project will achieve is to allow for any snagging issues on Histon Road to be sorted out, and also it gives us a window of opportunity for any urgent, say, utility or maintenance works that have actually been put on hold while Histon Road has been under construction. If we move now to Councillor Manning's question and comment, I guess just really clearly from the officer's point of view, there's absolutely no intention that there is any reduction in spend on RPZs. Previously, the budget was separated out from city access. We're now suggesting it's rolled into the budget, but absolutely not reduced. And really, I know you referred to this, Councillor Manning, but the purpose really to consider residents parking in a more joined up way as part of the targeted integrated parking strategy that Isabel spoke about earlier. I think, and others will know more about this than me, but this is very much linked up with that the upcoming county council committee that will discuss just this very issue. So the commitment, I think, is absolutely there.
Okay, thank you for that. And members may want to revisit that or either of those points as we go through the report. So, Niamh, would you like to present the rest of the report?
Yeah, sure. And conscious that I'm having technical issues, so I have no video, and I'm looking into an iPad. So if there's any problems, please tell me. So thanks, Chair. On the report, if I can just draw attention to a couple of specific elements, perhaps. I guess on skills specifically, and we've talked about this for some time, and particularly on the new contract, there's a really positive update, which it's worth sharing, I think. So just to touch on that, following a successful tender process, officers are now asking the Joint Assembly to endorse the winning bid, which came from the incumbents actually. So that's Form the Future, but actually part of their bid, and just to say that Form the Future will be working really closely with Cambridge Regional College to deliver that new service. That's a key part of their bid. So the report goes into some detail, but just to draw this out, because I think this is important, particularly given our previous experience. The three bids we received were of high quality, and the successful bidder scored a combined quality and price score of 95%, which is really high. Procurement colleagues commented on that as well. So just to remind members of the scope of the service, we run through that in the report, but in terms of timing, so when are we going to get this stuff started? So the initiation process of the contract is underway. We've met the providers already, and we continue to meet them regularly ahead of the formal start of the service on the 1st of April. So this is very much underway already. And a point, I guess, to cover off that I know members have raised previously, in terms of how this work is integrated with the skills element of the CPCA's business growth service. We've talked here before that there's some very obvious opportunities to join up and not just join up, but kind of maximise what we're doing together. And just to reassure members that CPCA and GCP officers have been and continue to work out exactly what that looks like. The contract for the CPCA's growth service has very recently been signed, so we're now enabled to go into that sort of detail in a way that I think we weren't really able to fully before. And in fact, I'm having another meeting with CPCA officers tomorrow to go into a bit more detail. So yeah, just to say that we're absolutely committed to it, and actually we know that Form the Future has already met the Combined Authorities delivery provider, so it's happening on that level as well. So happy to take questions on that specifically shortly. If I can just move on to the second point I think I want to raise on the budget this time. So we're asking the Joint Assembly to endorse a budget, which we ask you to do annually. The detail of this, and there's a fair bit of detail, is set out in Appendix 3, but the kind of corresponding narrative is set out in Section 15. Overall comment, I guess I would just say that you'll see we have, with as much detail as we can at this moment, set out a multi-year strategy, which I hope responds to some member feedback we got on this process this time last year. So I think that's all I want to specifically draw out, Chair, and absolutely ready for any questions or queries on that or any other elements in the report.
Thank you very much, Niamh. So I'm going to go through the sections, and if there are comments, please raise your hands. So the first of those is on housing and strategic planning. The second on skills, which Niamh has just mentioned. I think probably if I could just step into what she just said and say that I am sure the Assembly members would want to welcome the extended contract with Form the Future, the expanded contract with Form the Future, because that also emphasises their success in the past as well, and congratulates them on that. Are there any other points that any other members wanted to make on skills? Okay, I'll move straight to smart places. I've got Mike Sargent.
Thank you, Chair. I similarly like to endorse what you said about skills. You know, that is a sign of intervention to meet a changing situation. But sorry, on smart, I am still frustrated about slow progress on smart signalling, page 117. I think it is alluded to elsewhere in terms of interventions, in terms of traffic management, demand management. And I really will call yet again that we crack on with smart signalling to make sure that we use that as much as anything to control the network and make sure that people are deterred from bringing cars into Cambridge and using certain routes. It's a way that we've spent quite a lot of money with the county over recent years to upgrade all the signals in the city. And you know, we need to get on with using those.
Okay, thank you. I'm always amused by the way people speak about smart signalling as also supporting helping cars coming into the city, but it's used on both sides, I think. The other point is from Helen Valentine.
Yeah, a quick question from me on the autonomous vehicle pilot project, which is frustratingly slow. And it's really, it seems to have come to a halt because they couldn't visit the site, and it's not clear to me why even in lockdown they weren't able to work outside. So I guess I'm just seeking reassurance that that's not an excuse for things going wrong behind the scenes, and that we will soon be back on track.
Thanks, Helen. Niamh, do you want to field those two?
Thanks, Chair. So just on the first query, you know, I think we're pushing progress, and we're not losing sight of that, but accept Mike's point, of course. Just on the autonomous vehicle pilot, Gemma may wish to add to this, but Helen, my understanding is it wasn't possible to test that out. I think it's literally a small vehicle and a number of different people, never mind about the fact that people would have had to travel from Leicester. I think literally getting inside of that vehicle wouldn't have been safe. That's the feedback I think we've got from the company.
Thank you. So I'm going to move to the next section, which is transport. Mike Sargent. Haven't heard from you for a while, Mike.
I know, Tim. Yeah, I want to make a general point, illustrating it with the CBC update. It's on page 120, item 11. In other roles, such as being chair of the Joint Development Control Committee, I do raise the issue of transport on the biomedical campus. And there's much to do in terms of structural measures, and including, of course, the new South Station when it comes along. But there's so many things we seem to fail up on in just messages to people. So I was conscious when there was bus stops outside of Patworth, the real-time information was not updated in ATC and other places to indicate there were buses stopping outside Patworth. And I've had an instance today. I've got an invitation to go to an appointment at Addenbrooke's today, which tells me the only option to get to Addenbrooke's is to go and park in car park 1. Yeah. And we've got to really use our influence to not just put the structure, you know, the hard infrastructure in and all the other bits and pieces, but we do need to be focusing on making sure the messages that are coming through to people are there and people can make use of them. And currently, I think we're being let down by many people for whatever reason, that although we spend money, we don't always get the support then with people being informed as to what actions they should be taking.
Thank you. I'll pick that up. Well, after we've heard from first Karen Kennedy, then Ian Solomon, and then Lucy Netzinger.
Thank you, Chair. Again, this might be a reflection of me being new to the discussions, but on the transport RAG report, there's a couple of reds on there and I couldn't see the narrative. I'm well aware of the A428 discussions, but also there's a current red status on the Fulbourn, Cherry Hinton, Eastern Access. Could somebody point me to the reason for that? It might be in there and I might have missed it, please.
Okay, we'll pick that up in a moment, Karen. That's good. Thank you. Ian Solomon.
Just on the west of Cambridge package, I think at the last assembly we were expecting the planning decision on the Park and Ride at Junction 11 to be in January. That's now been pushed back to May. I mean, any insight on the reason for that, and would those reasons affect the time that it would take to make a decision on any of the other park and rides or travel hubs that are being submitted? And also, just on a slightly lighter note, at what point do we stop referring to Cambridge South East Transport as a study?
Okay, got the questions. Thanks, Ian. Lucy Netzinger.
Thank you. I just wanted to pick up on the points that Ian was raising earlier in relation to the money for the residents parking implementation. I think that there is very broad frustration here at the blocking of the county council of that role, and there's certainly very, very significant frustration with it in my division, where there are some of the schemes that Ian was talking about where people had started on a scheme and then it's just been held, and that's deeply frustrating for people. I hope very much that block will be removed, and I am slightly reassured by what Tim said earlier, and I hope that that will change at the county council meeting. However, I think if it doesn't, I can see why there is a need for making sure that that money is well spent, but it would be very helpful if we could have some reassurance that that will still be spent on measures that would try and discourage on-street parking and discourage people from driving into Cambridge and just using the streets here as a free car park, which is one of the things that is so unhelpful. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go back to Niamh now, if you would like to pick those up.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So there may be some points that Peter will come in on shortly, but just to cover off a couple, Mike Sargent, I know there's a lot of intensive work going on down at CBC and bringing partners together on that. We're committed to continuing that. Absolutely. Karen, on Fulbourn Eastern Access, you're absolutely right. My understanding is that has just been slightly delayed, which is why it's red. But again, Peter might be able to shed some more light. Ian, why are we calling that a study? Very good point. We will change it. And if for anything else, Peter, if there's any further points to pick up, happy for you to come in.
Yeah, thank you. So, Karen, yes, you're right. We'll amend the report. The outstanding issue on the Fulbourn is a floating bus stop. We've been in discussions for a length of time with a local pub, but I'm hoping we've got a plan, but nevertheless, we'll amend the report in terms of all of the reds. Cambridge Southwest Travel Hub, Ian, we've been, or rather the planning authority's been notified of a potential call-in by MHCLG, and they've given a date of mid-May where they will take that that decision. So at the moment, we don't have a final date for the planning committee, and I'll undertake as soon as we do, then I'll send that round. We're certainly pressing on that. In terms of any implications for others, well, really it's case by case, because they've raised it because of the size and the location. So perhaps if we were looking at a maybe a different location or a much smaller size, there may be less of an issue, but they will reserve the right. And I mean, in terms of residents parking monies, I mean, this is an accounting move. So maybe our wording has been a little bit unhelpful. We're simply moving the money from one pot to another. The money will be available for residents parking schemes. There's no change in that regard.
That's good the way you put that at the end there, Peter. And I think we'll pick that out and send that with our input to the board, because I think it's important that what is being done there is not misinterpreted by others. And perhaps that needs slapping onto the decision. So I am now going to the next section, which is on economy and environment. Are there any points on that? Karen?
Sorry, I'd put my hand up again to make another point about finance, the transport finance, but it's fine.
You've not contributed so much, so I'm very happy if you want to make the point still.
Okay. Well, I guess it was just, I have made this to the officers. It's whether the way the report is presented is a little bit misleading by the fact that the Chisholm Trail is green in both categories. It's factually correct in that it was green at the last meeting, and it is green, the budget at this meeting. But in fact, as we know, and we have a paper on it later, the budget has actually had to be increased by about 45% in between meetings. And so it's a little bit misleading, I would say, but you know, it's probably factually correct, but maybe it doesn't convey what should be conveyed.
And again, Chair, we would accept that as a point. I think it is factually correct, but it is unhelpful, so we will amend that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'm on to the GCP budget strategy and allocations for 21-22. Are there any points on those pages? Noel Kavanagh.
Yeah, either you've jumped ahead or I'm left behind. But anyway, I'll just ask. 15.7, Eastern Access. Are we on
transport again, Mark? You're back on transport again, are you?
No, are we on the same page on this?
We're on GCP budget strategy and allocations.
What page is that?
128.
Oh, good. That's what I'm on. Yeah. Look, Eastern Access.
Go for it. Quickly.
What I can say is, please bring back paper. Reading off screens. I'm going cross-eyed here. No, it's just a quick question. It mentions, you know, money allocated Eastern Access for Newmarket Road. Is there any funding at this stage being allocated to Coldham's Lane? Because Coldham's Lane features in this Eastern Access consultation and study. And I've got residents who are very concerned about what's going to be happening to their road, you know, short term, medium term and long term. So is there anything to report?
Okay, we've got the question. Thanks very much. We'll cover that. Have we got any other? Oh yes, got Mike Sargent.
You've been missing me, Chair, haven't you? Yeah, I'm sorry. I welcome what Peter Blake said about residents parking, but it just illustrates that we have to be very careful about wording in the reports. And on residents parking, it does actually say on page 130 that the unspent element of it will now be returned to the city centre access budget in order to consider residents parking alongside other parking priorities as part of an integrated parking strategy. And these sort of words are not misinterpreted. They do indicate that the money's gone back into a pot. So I would urge officers to make sure they are very careful in future with wording, because it does fill up my email box, if nothing else. Thank you.
Thanks very much. So I see no other hands on the budget strategy and allocations. And so we are at the end of that item with 2 more to go. So the next is item 8, electricity grid reinforcement update and next steps. And I'm going to ask Rachel initially and then Debbie Bondi to speak to this.
Yes, thanks, Chair. So just a couple of things to say by way of context at the start of this item. You've had updates on this project as part of the quarterly progress report, and indeed it's an item within your future investment strategy. But just to remind Joint Assembly members that really we're trying to tackle this because it's one of the barriers to growth that will inhibit both the delivery of homes and jobs, but also essentially your aspirations around the electrification of transport solutions. So, you know, it does present a serious and significant barrier to growth if we're not able to address this problem. And when we've looked at it, utility providers, they're basically constrained by the way it's set up at the moment, that they operate reactively to confirm demand. And that's really problematic for areas such as Greater Cambridge with high growth forecasts. And obviously we've also got ambitious plans for tackling climate change. So that, you know, system doesn't really work for us. Ideally, there'd be a change at national level. And certainly I think talking at the working group on this, as well as informally at the board, I think there's a lot of appetite to see that happen. And there is some wording included in the report on that. But whilst we can lobby for that change, it's really unlikely to happen in the time frame that we're talking about this becoming a critical issue. So we would hope that the Assembly supports us continuing to work on the project. So whilst you know, we've agreed the principle of this report is now providing an update on progress to date and looking towards later decisions in the year. And Debbie will run through a little bit more detail on that, bearing in mind the time that we're now at in the meeting. Debbie.
Thank you very much. So I'll try and be quick. Since we were asked to develop the proposals further for the project, we've engaged some consultants who are particularly skilled in this type of work, and we now have clarity about 3 distinct delivery approaches that would enable GCP to accelerate the development of the additional capacity, the distribution capacity required. It's quite a technical area. It's laid out in the report, but just to quickly summarize the 3 delivery options. The first means working solely with our local distribution network operator. For us in this area, that's UK Power Networks or UKPN. The second option is very similar, except this time we get the opportunity to seek competitive pricing from a third party to build some elements of the infrastructure, but UK Power Networks would still operate the infrastructure once it's delivered. And the third option would minimise the involvement of UKPN, and an independent network operator would operate it once it's built. So really, these options, each option involves working with the electricity distribution market in different ways to increase the capacity. The options vary according to a number of factors, including the complexity of delivery, the ability to seek competitive pricing of that delivery, and opportunities to recover the cost of that investment from developers later on wanting to connect to that infrastructure. We're not in a position to make a decision on this right now, and indeed we need to gather quite a bit more information before we do so. Figure 1 in the report lays out a kind of the steps in the project, a framework for the project. And the next step is to make a formal application to UK Power Networks, which we intend to do in April. Their response will give us invaluable information, which will help us to identify the pros and cons in this area of the 3 different options. And we also plan to do some early market testing with relevant operators in the market to understand what they might be prepared to offer. This will enable us with our consultants to fully identify the pros and cons and make a recommendation later in 2021. As Rachel said earlier, a budget has been identified of 25 million has been identified for this in the future investment strategy, and the paper identifies £200,000 as a budget for the next stage of work to be drawn down from that budget. And finally, a business case will be presented later this year in 2021, which will add significantly more detail to this, including about cost recovery, which is clearly of critical importance. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Debbie. So take contributions on this, but it would remind the Assembly that this there is no board decision going to happen at the other end of this this time. This is a report on how far this project has got, which we previously supported. And so this report is for transparency and awareness. And on that basis, happy to take any contributions, but hope that we aren't going to have the whole thing out all over again. So, we haven't heard from Mike for at least one item. Mike Sargent.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just reflecting on the nature of provision of utilities, really, Chair. So we know the issues of water and the reactive way in which that is handled, the need for water supplies, the convoluted and complicated nature of broadband, and here we are again with the situation with electricity. So, you know, it's painful really to watch all this going on. But what my question really is, I note on page 144 and 2.4 what issues are being addressed, but we're obviously working on the next local plan where we are very much talking about shortage of water, etc. And we are looking at different growth scenarios. Will we need to come back in 5 years' time when the new local plan's approved, or at what stage to look at another substation? Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that question. Noel Kavanagh.
Oh, Tim, you've been doing a marvellous job chairing this, but can I just point out, I didn't get a response to my last question. I think you might have got a bit befuddled by Mike Sargent jumping in again. I asked about the Eastern Access and any budget allocations for Coldham's Lane within that, because it's all part of the same.
Thanks for reminding me, Noel. We'll take it when we finish this item. I'll ask officers to give an answer quickly then. Let's stay with this for the moment. Are there any other contributions on the electric grid item? There are not. So I think that's fine. There's little feedback I can deliver on that, but that's not bad. So let's go back to Noel's.
Sorry, Chair. I did actually have a question rather than it just being a rant.
It's you two guys that you're confusing me.
Okay. My question was how future-proof, if you like, and will we need to come back a few more years?
Who's going to take that, Debbie?
Yes, I'm happy to take that. Indeed, Councillor Sargent, completely agree with what you're saying. We're working hand in hand with the new local plan team, working with them to evaluate demand and tease that out further as a kind of continuous piece of work, so that we truly understand the trajectory and what's needed. In reality, the project that we're discussing here will probably seek to deliver stepwise increases in capacity as part of the overall picture for this area.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Now I'm going to reach back for the answer to the Eastern Access question and Coldham's Lane that Noel asked. Who would like to give that?
Yeah, I'll do it, Chair. So in terms of Eastern Access, it's coming to your next meeting and then onward to the next board after that. And so watch this space. There'll be something in there.
Very good. Okay, that's a good trailer for the next time we meet, I think, isn't it? thank you very much for that. So then we come to the question of the next meeting, which I just would like to retain your focus on for a moment. That is in hopefully in your calendars for the 3rd of June, but we are reviewing that apparently at the moment because of its proximity to the elections which will have gone on in May and require councils to sort themselves out a bit before knowing who is going to be on bodies like this. And so that's one reason. And the other reason is that it looks like being an especially intensive meeting of the Assembly, because there will be significant items on all 4 of our radial access routes coming to that. The east, the Waterbeach one, the southeast, and the Cambourne to Cambridge one. So I think you can see that we are likely to be seeing quite a lot of stuff to talk about ourselves, but maybe quite a few public representations. And so the suggestion is that the day when we find it to reschedule is one that should be a morning and afternoon meeting, so that we can give it the attention it deserves in total. So I think that's just really an advance notice that you will be hearing from officers about the attempts to reschedule. But in the meantime, keep the 3rd of June, just in case we totally fail with all of that. Don't let go of the 3rd of June until you know there's an alternative.
Chair, before you close, can I speak? I've had my hand up for some time, but I've got a feeling my video's not working very well.
I can see your hand now, Dave. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's been there a little while. I'm sorry, we're going backwards again. I'll be brief.
We are closing the meeting, Dave.
Well, I was trying to get in on the comment that Peter Blake made about Noel's answer, which I've been waiting for some time. Can I just take 30 seconds to say how important it is? We've attended the consultations on the Eastern Access, but there's been no reference of what's going to happen on the road that Noel mentioned. It seems to have been excluded. Coldham's Lane does not seem to be part of it.
Dave, this is an item for next time. So save the speech now, make it when we reconvene in the summer to talk about Eastern Access.
I just wanted Peter to know that we were...
We've got it.
Chair, if it helps, and I know I've just got to skip on to the final report in a moment. But in terms of Coldham's Lane, it was raised as part of the consultation, and there will be commentary, I would imagine, when we bring that paper back to you. So if you could just bear with us whilst we go through the consultation, then I'm sure we'll get there. And then I've just got the sort of final report, Chair, in terms of the Chisholm Trail.
Oh, sorry. I've skipped an item by mistake there. My mistake.
So if I'll just crack on, if I may. So in terms of the Chisholm Trail, the Executive Board received an urgent item in December regarding the scheme. So this followed concerns that had been raised by Cambridgeshire County Council, who are managing the project, regarding delivery problems that they were experiencing. And paragraph 2.2 outlines them in sort of broad brush ways based on the county council report that's appended. So there were issues around the design, around risks being underestimated, the level of preparatory work undertaken, and problems with land acquisition. So the Executive Board agreed in December to meet the shortfall of up to £6.6 million from GCP budgets, and then support the contribution from developers of up to £2 million. Pardon me. But they also asked for a short report to come to you and to them this time around in terms of what are the implications for the partnership in terms of future project management. And as you'll see, I mean, where we get to on that is a move to greater self-delivery and reduce reliance on third parties. And associated with that is obviously increasing our internal capacity to deliver schemes. And maybe I'll leave it there, Chair, in light of time, but happily take any questions.
Okay, so this is an item that is really for our information, because it's reporting on something that the board did already at its last meeting, because it it emerged after our assembly met. When I went along to the board, I said what I believed that members of the assembly would want me to say, that we were not impressed. I mean, paraphrasing, we were not impressed by this either, and believed that action needed to be taken to learn the lessons, and that seems to have been agreed by the board, in the sense they've taken back control of this project. So we can say what you like, and we could stay here while we listen to each other, but in a sense the die is now cast for the future. Unless anyone's got anything compelling to add, I'm going to move to the end of the meeting. So I saw no hands, and we'll end it there. And thank you all very much for your forbearance with the technology and slightly anarchic chairmanship at the end there. I apologise, but we seem to have that steady and reliable knack to expand any agenda into the size available, and sometimes even longer. So thank you for that, and hope to see you again in the summer for our next meeting. Thank you very much. Bye.
Right. Thanks, Tim. Farewell. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.